Welcome to Very Honored Frater BT's Esoterinerd podcast, episode 54, in which I interview Kess Frey. This is actually our second interview. Kess Frey has recently published The Will of Divine Love, Centering Prayer and Spiritual Psychology. He met Thomas Keating in 1989 and has been involved with centering prayer ever since. He offers introductory centering prayer workshops, facilitates prayer groups and retreats, and is active in prison ministry. But first, I'd like to introduce a new segment called... In reference to Lon Milo DuQuette's quote that it's all in your head, you just have no idea how big your head is. Lon Milo DuQuette wrote a poem on Facebook a couple of days ago. Well, I got to thinking after hearing this poem that from any rational point of view, Edward Kelly made up the entire Enochian system, and similarly, well, I'll just let you hear his poem.
More Than Balls by Lon Milo DuQuette. Buddha sat down all alone beneath the Bodhi tree and did not get up till he was wise, well, maybe once to pee. Muhammad's cave was very small, there was only room for one, and Jesus prayed alone all night, he was God's only son. Joseph Smith was by himself when he bumped into Moroni. No one helped him write that book, but he was such a phony. These were men, old Aeon guys, who weren't at all romantic. Some were evil, some insane, and all of them pedantic. Before this age, it took more than balls to show us all what's holy. It took more than Iwas and Uncle Al. It took Rose Kelly Crowley.
Thank you very much, Ella, for that recital. You can find Ella at a sister podcast, stoopingstarlight.com. Stooping Starlight is a blog and podcast that is aimed at anyone interested in current thalamic thought, art, expression, literature, magic, ritual, and writing. The only difference from any other blog or podcast discussing the same subjects is that the content is curated, written, and spoken by women only. Speaking of sister podcasts, check out firstmatterradio.blogspot.com. This is a new podcast focusing on traditional Golden Dawn practice. The first episode hasn't aired yet, but when it does, it will feature her interview with Stefan Edmonds a couple weeks ago. The podcast is hosted by Terry Appleton. She will be a guest on this podcast sometime next week. We will be discussing, among other things, Pamela Coleman Smith's natal chart. Our guest tonight, Kess Frey, interviewed my dad in 1990.
Thursday, July 26th, 1990. I'm up in Sierra Madre Canyon, Southern California, at the home of my friend John Dan Reeb, who has been teaching for,
24 years at Pasadena City College. English, it's supposed to be.
24 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
if you'd like to hear that interview, check out Edward Reeb's podcast, Episode 8, Professor John Dan Reeb, Part 2. I listened to that interview many times, and so I was very familiar with Kess before I ever had a proper conversation with him. Occasionally I would search for him online, but I didn't know how to spell his name. It's spelled Kessfrey. I now know. But a few years ago, we got in touch through social media. Then, when he was here in town visiting his sister, we were able to meet up, and that was when I recorded the interview that I used for episode 2 of the Esoterinerd podcast. Anyhow, he's back in town, he's just written a book, and so, without further ado, let's get to that interview, shall we? Greetings, Frater. Welcome to the Esoterinerd podcast. You're Frater.
Oh, I'm Frater. Oh, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Edward.
Yeah, it's good to see you. And
I brought some things to show you also in my bag here.
oh, cool.
You know, a couple of copies of some of my books,
Nice.
particularly the newest one, which you said you had misplaced or
I
something.
know. Yeah, everything's kind of scattered. But another thing that might be an interesting thing to have around for this, and I'll edit it later so it's more concise.
Oh, okay. So we're recording now.
Yeah, but I have these, my dad's old esoterica binders.
Esoterica Finders.
Yeah, this is all
Oh, binders.
his research from his esoteric studies.
Oh, my God. That must be a treasure trove.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's funny when I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, this, But yeah, these are all of his articles from Louisiana Mound Society. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. He got real interested in archaeology.
Yeah.
And the truer, deeper archaeology, as opposed to, I think he used to call it the Flatlander archaeology or something like that.
Yeah, he was writing articles for the Ancient American and making connections and drawing tie-ins, and the Mormons jumped on one of his articles, because he pointed out that there was evidence that one aspect of the Book of Mormon was true. I mean, we know my dad. You know, he wasn't like praying to Moroni while he was writing it, but he wrote an article in the Ancient American that was like, isn't it interesting that the Book of Mormon said that there were domesticated horses in Peru at around this period, and according to these cave drawings, there were. And so, that's interesting, like, not to necessarily say, I mean, he's just pointing it out, So when, at one point, the Peruvians who were Mormons there was a study that came out where somebody tested their DNA, and, because supposedly they were the lost tribe or something, and found out that they had no connection whatsoever to Hebrew DNA, and so a bunch of people started resigning their they lost their faith, and they were becoming not Mormons. And so I had a friend translate that article that my dad wrote into Spanish and put it up online for them to find.
Well, that might encourage them.
Yeah.
A bit in their faith.
Just balance it out with a little something, so. But anyway, so that's there. We can allude to that. But yeah, let's talk about, did you want to start with what you were talking about with the new esoterica, or the new esotericism? That
would be good. Yeah, well, this thought came to me like a few days ago after, I realized we were going to get together and do this while I was here in Southern California. So it's kind of an idea of a balancing out of people's spiritual practices. And I imagine that most of the people, that are in your audience practicing different forms of esoteric discipline,
to some degree,
using like the
or
tree,
thinking about it, or just interested in it, or whatever they're doing.
Yeah, using the tree of life, as kind of a paradigm, or a frame of reference, and working with the arcana of the tarot, for example, doing various types of what I would call concentrative practices where a person is in control of their meditation or their prayer, and they're focusing, using the imagination, using sound, mantric sound, using gestures and images and so forth to activate certain energies from the deep unconscious.
That reminds me, got to stand a little bit too. Sometimes I forget my body. That's one of my points about people in the West is they ignore their bodies too much. They get into their heads. My dad especially, it's a case in point. But so I'm like, okay, got to stand.
Yeah, well,
I didn't mean to cut you off.
I can relate to that because after I sit for a while, my body gets stiff and.
Yeah, it's getting worse for me. I don't know.
Well, it gets worse as you get older.
Yeah.
From my own experience.
Yeah.
So, anyway, getting back to this topic here, there are all these concentrative practices, not only in Western esotericism or occultism, but also in the Eastern practices, like in the Vajrayana Buddhism and the Tantric meditation and so forth, where we use our faculties to activate energies from deep inside us that will transform us and change our consciousness and bring us more in tune with the spirit, with the universal spirit.
Yeah.
So this is really important. And this is primarily what most people are doing in their meditative practices and their prayer life, in magical, operations, ceremonial things, rituals, just all kinds of stuff, from, hatha yoga, which is physical, to pranayama, the breath, working with the breath, to the visualizations and the repetition of mantras, the visualization of mandalas, the chakras, the energy centers, and on and on. And there's just a great cornucopia of wealth of practices that have been developed by people in different cultures and different traditions, all aiming towards this process of inner transformation and spiritual awakening. And of course, sometimes people go off on tangents and they get kind of overly concerned with protector deities, or wrathful energies, or evoking different types of entities and spirits from the spheres on the tree and so forth. And so my idea for a new esotericism is not anything that would replace what people are already doing or what they are attracted to and what they feel is working for them and nourishes them, but it's something that will add a new depth dimension to it. Now, as we both know, the word occult means hidden, esoteric, means inner or secret. So what I'm proposing is a type of a practice which reverses what we're normally doing when we are concentrating and choosing what to do and we're in control of it. This is a practice that allows the spirit within us to become active, and we become the receivers of what the spirit is doing. We all know that the divine indwelling exists in all of us, in the deepest core of our soul. We could give this a variety of names, refer to it as Christ within you, or the Buddha nature, or Atman, the higher self. Various terms are used to point towards this deeper spiritual reality, which is our true nature. And we're both human beings and spiritual beings. And using the tree of life as a paradigm, I would say that the lower triad, the personality astral triad, that represents our human ground, our human nature, where our faculties of intellect, which would be the splendor sphere or Hod, and imagination, will, and emotions, and so forth, would be the victory sphere, also the desire nature, which is called Netzach, and then the foundation sphere, Yesod, that's our sphere of memory, patterns, the subconscious mind, the unconscious mind, and so forth. Those are our basic faculties, and that's kind of the level on which we go through the inner struggle, the moral, ethical struggle between the abstraction to good and evil that is an inherent part of our human nature.
Right.
And then, of course, below that is the kingdom sphere of Malkuth, which is the physical material world, our physical body, which is our vehicle, our instrument in this incarnation, and the entire physical universe, which, as we're learning through science and so forth, seems to be pretty much limitless and expanding. So above that is the spiritual moral triad. That's where our spiritual nature, our higher self, is located.
Right.
Particularly, the beauty sphere, which corresponds to Christ in us, or the Mahia, as they say in Hebrew, or Ben, the sun, which is the name for that also in Hebrew.
Yeah.
So that's our higher self, and then we have the sphere of severity, Gabura, which represents our awareness of the pairs of opposites, duality, conscience, justice, also fear, and so forth, and the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. And then on the other side, on the masculine pillar, is the mercy sphere, which is the sphere of love and compassion and total harmony and goodness. And all of those, plus the higher spheres, are poured into the higher self, or the Christ. So it's really super empowered with all the goodies.
There's so much there, and I'm really glad. It's good to give a good rundown for people who aren't as familiar with it. People who are familiar with it, I've heard a lot of different, like that, like what you're stating all sounds very lucid and very well put together. My only knee-jerk things that come up as I'm listening to it are that the very concept of good and evil have been called into question in recent centuries. Where this system is all rooted in earlier centuries where it wasn't questioned. So things like in the Practicus Great of the Golden Dawn, it says, and Lilith, the queen of demons, and it's just like, oh, well, yeah, the evil woman, of course, and nobody says, well, what about Alanis Morissette? Because we're talking about Victorian England. And so as a spiritual system that's useful in this day and age, basic assumptions about good and evil in Victorian England aren't necessarily going to be held in common by the practitioners today. Mm-hmm. Just a random example. I'm thinking of right at the core. There's the I wish I could remember his name. It starts with an E. It's one of those Greek philosophers. The one who was pointing out
Epicurus?
That maybe with the morality comes from the fact that we all want to dominate. And none of us wants to be dominated. And so if we're all going to work together, if we're all going to be in a society together, we need to agree upon a system which we'll call, for lack of a better word, ethics. And say, this is mine, not yours. If you take this, that's called stealing. Stealing is bad. We'll all punish one of us who steals. And so these basic assumptions are put into place so that we can all behave nicely amongst each other. And that's where good and evil comes in. And that's about as real as it is. I mean, when it comes to, and then we look at a lion and we say, is it evil for the lion to do what he does? No, it's a lion. It's like, well, is it evil for the serial killer to do what he does? Yes, that's evil. And it's like, okay. I mean, you can kind of feel, well, it feels evil. Well, yeah, we watched a lot of horror movies, and when we were kids, we went, I'm evil, I'm the bad guy, I'm in G.I. Joe. And so, we all have, these patterns, but I don't know how useful they are, because people used to just recently think that homosexuals were evil, and people used to just recently think that Jews were evil, and people today think certain people are evil that are my friends. Satanists, for instance. I have plenty of people who are card-carrying Satanists, who are friends, who I don't think are evil at all. In fact, I've met more evil Christians, if I'm going to use good and evil. But okay, so that's one level. Then the other level is I've recently been personally, because as you know, I'm ex-Golden Dawn. Like my friend Gordon was ex-Scientologist. So I'm recovering Golden Dawn the way that a lot of people are recovering Catholics. I never was Catholic. I chose to be Catholic as part of my Golden Dawn phase, but I kind of moved away from that. But on paper, I'm still Catholic. But what's my point? My point is higher self. I like to use true self or truest self because it points to the right direction. I think that higher and lower, really, when you look at the tree of life before Athanasius Kircher got a hold of it, the German Jesuit in the 1600s who decided it should look the way it does, before that it was rings of a tree, and the very middle was Malkut, and the outer edge was Keter, and it was all like the rings of a tree going from inward to outward. So where's the higher self? Which one's higher? Well, there's no up on that diagram. So it's a more recent diagram that makes the term higher self useful. Mm-hmm. And it causes people to think that we're talking about something that's quote unquote in heaven. Psychologically, people who've gone to church as kids, they think, oh, you mean in heaven? Oh, up there? And then as an atheist, we think, well, up there changes every 2 minutes when the earth turns. We're pointing in a different direction in space when we're pointing up. So what are you even talking about? So we automatically become disbelievers in afterlife because we've been told as children that there was a Santa Claus and that when you die you go up there, and then we grow up and we learn there is no Santa Claus and there's an outer space and the earth is turning. So we naturally become atheists, So I reject the term higher self a little bit. And even though I acknowledge that it's part of the standard. I used to be premonstrator of a Golden Dawn order, so I used to enforce the standard, and people used to ask me what the standard was, and I would explain it to them, and I always had two answers. I'd say, okay, I'm going to answer as premonstrator, and then I'm going to answer as BT. But I'm no longer premonstrator, I'm just BT.
What's BT?
That's my name, Ben Tiferet, son of Typhriot.
Oh.
Yeah. But anyway, so those are a couple thoughts. I don't know if I was going anywhere with that.
Well, I had a few flashes while you were
go for it.
Expounding there regarding the ideas of good and evil. These are very, very ancient ideas.
You asked my dad about this question once in 1990. But anyway, he had his answer. But what's your answer? And then we'll go into his answer.
Well, what is good and what is evil can be defined by our cultural conditioning. But I think that there is a standard, a universal standard of these two things. And I'll have to, take a moment to try to explain what that is. But basically, there is such a thing as ethics and morality in terms of whether someone tells what is true or whether they are deceptive, whether they lie.
Right.
And the golden rule, for example, is an illustration of that, to treat others the way you would want to be treated.
Right.
And if you do that, then you're doing
good.
What is good.
Yeah.
But also, I believe there's a higher principle. Obviously, it's a duality. When you have good and evil, it's one of the pairs of opposites. And in my understanding of the Tree of Life, awareness of those pairs of opposites doesn't dawn until the soul actually reaches the severity sphere of Gabura. As you'll notice, I'm not sure if I'm getting this right or not.
Oh, I have a few depictions of it.
You have a few depictions of it?
Yeah, and I have the one that I made.
Well, the justice card.
Yeah, it's between Gabura and
between, Gabura and Tiferet. And very good. This is a very nice illustration.
Thank you.
So, over here in the mercy sphere, the way I see it, when the individual soul is born, it's born out of the universal Divine Mother, or Bina, and then it travels across the abyss, separating the supernal triad from the spiritual moral triad, and it spends some time in the mercy sphere, which is a sphere of harmony, love, and compassion, and a sense of oneness. Everything is great. There's no conflict. There's no disturbance.
Right.
And then
there's a disturbance.
Then it gets projected across this energy path over into the severity sphere. So this, the imprint of being in this sphere, is our soul's deep memory of its former paradise, which is represented in the Bible by the Garden of Eden.
Right.
This idyllic state of peace and harmony and innocence and love and intimacy and being loved. It's a state of ideal contentment, but it's also a state of relative ignorance and innocence as regards to what else is, existing in the tree, because it hasn't been there yet. So at some point it's projected across here into the severity sphere, where it begins to experience the pairs of opposites, one of which is the opposition of good and evil. Now, in the story of Adam and Eve, the forbidden fruit, as we all know, was the fruit that grew on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So Adam and Eve, representing generic humanity, when they chose to partake of that, it says in the scripture that their eyes were opened. Now, that doesn't mean that they were physically blind before they ate it, but it means that their eyes were open, that they saw everything in a whole new perspective.
Right.
It was as if the forbidden fruit was like a psychoactive substance that changed their consciousness. And they became aware of their so-called nakedness. So there was a sense of shame that they didn't have when they were innocent.
This is all stuff that we all learn, and that
Now, this is
it's
in
like
the story.
poison. It's like poison to the soul of Western civilization. So what use can we draw from this?
Well, I'm trying to point that out.
Because we're all told, like, oh, well, you should be ashamed to be naked. Because everybody's ashamed to be naked. No, they're not. It's just a Western hang-up,
It's a learned sense of shame, definitely. And that story of Adam and Eve, which I discuss in some detail in that book, Human
Like the
Ground,
free the nipple
Spiritual
movement
Ground.
is directly tied into this biblical passage right here. It's like, why do women cover their nipples? It's because of some twisted interpretation of these scriptures. But anyway.
They had this, according to the scripture, they had this sense of shame related to their sexuality and their genitals that they didn't have before. They ate that forbidden fruit, so they covered themselves up. They made aprons out of fig leaves or something, and they went and they ran and they hid in the bushes and so forth.
Yeah.
So they had gone through the change of consciousness, and there's kind of a wounding that takes place with it when you're shamed. When innocence is shamed, wounding takes place, and the wounding ends our innocence.
I believe, weren't they clothed in animal skin?
Well, that came after they were expelled.
Oh, okay.
And actually, I think
this might be the animal skin.
The physical body is the clothes of skin, because they were existing in the subtler realms.
Right.
Until when they were actually kicked out of the paradise, that was when they came down into physical incarnation. And so the clothes of skin weren't animal skins, which is the popular interpretation, but they're actually the physical human body, in my understanding of this.
Interesting.
But anyway, in this sphere, there's like this sense of love, universal love in the mercy sphere.
We're talking about Chesed, the blue sphere.
Chesed, the blue sphere, under on the
mercy side.
The pillar of mercy, in the center of the pillar of mercy, underneath the sphere of wisdom, or Hokmah. So what I'm saying is that the laws of cosmic justice, which delineate the difference between good and evil, they are based on the principle of universal love and oneness.
So variation from that.
So
when you're going against that, then that's the definition of evil.
When we don't act out of love for one another, or for ourselves, or for the creation, then we are starting to violate the laws of cosmic justice. They are set up in order to serve this principle of universal love. So the difference between right and wrong and good and evil is whether or not we're acting in harmony with love for one another.
But
and
then,
for the creation.
like down here, we get into, that one of the words for Hod is reason. And down even further, you get into the astral plane and you get into Malkut and all the manifestations.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to result, and my dad poetically put it in Transformations, and I'm sure we've seen plenty of examples where two people can be in total disagreement, both coming from a place of love, as far as they can tell, but interpreted or with nuances or with, some particular angle to it that, maybe we can recognize like there's a little bit of deception in it here on that angle over here and then here on that angle over there, and it results in their incompatibility. And they're both convinced that they're right, and they both think they're coming from a place of love.
Yeah, and that's one of the central tragedies of the human condition.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
it truly is. Like, for example, think of hatred between two groups of people, like, say, the Jews and the Palestinians, the Israeli and the Palestinians. They're acting out of identification with their respective groups and love for their respective groups, and they're trying to do what is right, and often they feel incited to seek revenge for wrong that's been done to them, and it kind of has been going back and forth, and there doesn't seem to be any end to it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do this, you're dishonoring those who you're supposed to love.
Right. Yeah.
So these are like
really rough.
the love. There's
rough
a legitimate love there, but there's a limitation to it. It's coming out of a limited angle, as your dad was saying.
Yeah.
It's coming out of a limited angle that's like, a horse's vision when it's got blinders on. It only sees love in here, and then everything outside of that is not in the field of its love.
And people get confused about, for example, in the name of love, I've been in a position myself where in the name of love, I've completely exhausted myself doing for others and neglecting myself. But it takes wisdom. It takes not necessarily Chokmah wisdom, that lofty Hebrew thing that we don't really, the definition includes that you're not supposed to know about it, stop thinking about it, you stupid mortal. Signed Rabbi so-and-so. No, real wisdom, the kind you get from experience, to realize that that's not a good idea. If you're gonna surrender to absolute love and say, use me, Lord, to be a servant of your will, and then you run around, feeding homeless people and teaching classes and trying to make ends meet for years until you realize, oh shit, I think I made the wrong. I did something wrong, I'm hollow in the middle, and now I'm a horrible, angry person, what did I do, and then so you have to kind of reel it all in and reevaluate everything, and then people are like, oh, now he's just being selfish. The people are still doing what or some form of it sometimes, but now I'm coming around to trying to serve again, but while doing it on my own terms. And that being part of the message that I'm getting across is do it on your own terms, get the knowledge without drinking the Kool-Aid, and also directly confronting oh yeah, there's that old shame that makes everybody feel shame, and it's not there until you say it's there, and it's I never even thought about it until someone told me that I should feel ashamed to be naked, because of the scripture. And there's the serpent in so many different religions is such a positive thing and represents nature and unfolding and regeneration and it also represents sexual reproduction, and it represents all these different things that Puritans will tell you, no, you should pray to the Virgin Mary to come and stomp on that serpent and make it go away. The serpent is evil. Don't you know the serpent is the one that gave you the tree of knowledge of good and evil and made you feel ashamed to feel naked? And it was like, no, it wasn't. It was you. You fucking Puritan. But I acknowledge that the Puritans at the time were an evolution. They were a step forward. They were a positive revolution at the time. They were saying, we're the most powerful people in the world. We shouldn't be behaving this way. We should really reel it in and be responsible. And they were at a time and place, and they were like, let's go to the New World and try to build a responsible civilization. And it's like, okay, you did your best. I thank you, ancestors, for that. But then when it kind of came down to our generation, it came down in the form of the old lady voice, trying to make you feel bad, But
well, there's a false sense of good and evil and a legitimate
So
mood.
many. There's
that's my
mirror
point.
refractions.
And much of the neurosis, of humanity is a result of the false sense of good and evil. And any kind of shaming about our natural energies creates neurosis.
Yeah.
And, the repression of sexuality, and that was Freud's breakthrough, was discovering, as he said in his book Civilization and Its Discontents, that neurosis is the price that humanity has to pay for civilization.
Oh.
And neurosis meaning the suppression of our natural energies and desires.
Yeah.
But, Freud left the spiritual realm out of his equation.
Right.
So he was rather pessimistic in his outlook. And, of course, observing the behavior of humans reinforced that pessimism because, along comes World War I and so forth.
Yeah.
But, that's the perversion of good and evil, which is so rampant. And what I believe is that from this sphere, when the soul moves across to the Gebura sphere, it receives the imprint of a true conscience, which is based on the principle of universal love. And it receives the ability to discriminate, to tell the difference from one thing to another, and awareness of the pairs of opposites. And these are all things it's going to need to survive when it comes down to physical incarnation. I mean, if we were just one with everything and loving everything, on the human level, we would be dysfunctional.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be able to survive. We would be dependent on someone else to feed us and take care of us. And that's how we are as infants when we're first born.
Yeah.
We're helpless and we're innocent, and unless we're traumatized in various ways in the womb and out of it, there's a very positive orientation towards everything that the unknowing innocent infant has. So a lot of the story of Adam and Eve is kind of an allegory to the birth process and coming into human life. And then from there, the soul moves down into the center of the tree, which is the beauty sphere, Tiphereth, that corresponds to the Mahia or Messiah, or the sun.
Now, a lot of people get hung up on that,
and
of course.
Or the Christos, or Christ.
Golden Dawn does its best to shortcut that by putting Osiris there and saying, never mind about whether it's the Messiah that's come to bring about the revolution or whether it's Jesus. Let's just talk about Osiris, as the...
Well, Osiris is an equivalent to me.
Yeah.
He's an equivalent to Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that we're dealing with here, and this is true like in reading holy books, like the scriptures, the Bible, or whatever, there's always the outer interpretation, which is what you're stating quite a bit, and then there's the inner allegorical interpretation, where all of these things represent energies that are within each individual soul.
Right.
So it's not the question of some, savior coming externally that's going to transform the world, but it's the question of this presence within us, which higher self is one name for it, true self is a name for it. In fact, in centering prayer, it's called the true self. There's various names for it, but this is the principle, the divine principle in human nature, which is the sum of all the energies of all the higher spheres above Tiphereth integrated. It's also the alchemical sphere, because it has the capacity to transform all the energies in the lower spheres as well. And that's what I want to talk about. Remember, we started about this idea of the new esotericism. This is where we're heading here.
Imagination is another word applied to Typhira, which I like to point out because some people say, is it just my imagination? I say, well, first of all, let's take the word just out. And the answer is yes. Yeah, it is your imagination, which is the expression of God in the material world as a human being that is you. And
it's the image, this is the image-making faculty. Also, though, this is an image-making faculty, too. on its own sphere.
And
But this
more
is the
of
primal one.
When I think of Netzach, I think of a reflection that you've gotten disoriented and you think you're the reflection. Like Typhoerit's been looking in a mirror for too long, and it thinks it's looking back at itself, and it starts desiring itself. Like Amaterasu, or I can never pronounce her name, the goddess in Shinto in Japan. Do you know that story? I'll diverge just for a minute. It's basically. There's a few versions of the story, but the sun went away, so there was eternal darkness, and they were like, "What happened to the sun?" And she was hiding in a cave because her brother pissed her off, and so they were like, they came out and they put a mirror right outside the cave, and they started making all kinds of noise and saying, "Oh wow, a new goddess has come, and she's even more beautiful than Amaterasu." And so Amaterasu looks outside the cave to see what they're talking about, and she sees her own reflection, and she becomes enraged and jealous, and she comes out, and then they block the cave, of course, with one of those Shinto arches with a rope across, and so now we have days again, and the sun goes around.
Yeah, that's another beautiful analogy
to
what happens within the soul.
Yeah.
And I mean, the whole phenomenon of falling in love.
Yeah.
You know, according to Carl Jung, for example, and I think he's right, involves the projection of our, if we're heterosexual, of our contrasexual ideal onto another human being who has the qualities that can call forth that projection.
Yeah.
And then we become enamored. But what's happening is we're not really seeing that person. We're seeing a reflection of our own unconscious counterpart.
Right.
So it's the exact same thing. I mean, we become in love with it. Or in other conditions, I guess you could become enraged with it if it was a projection of the dark side of your personality. Or what has been called the lower.
All of the above.
The lower self. Yeah. But so much of human life involves this maze of mirrors in which we're interacting with various positive and negative projections of things that are within us that we haven't integrated yet.
Yeah.
And the growth process and the healing process requires that we integrate all of that and withdraw the projections so we can actually see what's really out there and relate to it as it is.
One thing that helped me was when I realized, because I got brainwashed by a group that would say things like, since you're an initiate, that makes you special. You know, since you know better, then you have more responsibility than other people. You know, or like St. Paul would say, those who've heard about Christ have no excuse. If you haven't heard about Christ, you can keep on sinning, and that's fine, and you'll probably be forgiven. But once you've heard about Christ, you have no excuse. You better come to church, young man. And so it all kind of is rooted in that. What was I talking about? Back up. I'll have to rewind.
Well, we were talking about projections.
Projections.
And the need to, I was saying that we need to ultimately to withdraw.
Oh, right.
And integrate our projections and take responsibility for them rather than being in this
I found it.
Fantasy.
What it was at the time I had the mistaken belief that I personally had to integrate and reconcile all opposing and irreconcilable forces that I came in contact with, mentally or otherwise, in conversation through other people, within myself. And that was the ultimate goal. And that somehow the Philosopher's Stone, or whatever that is, was something that allows you to do that. And what was such a great relief was to realize, or, you know, it's kind of like to cog on some of the noosphere stuff, with Teilhard de Chardin, that we're actually all like brain cells in this great brain that is the human race. And so when someone says, hey, I need a little bit of advice, or whatever it is, they say, hey, you got a dime, you know, there's some exchange, there's some communication. What's happening right now between us and with this podcast, for instance, where these digested and partially digested, and the interaction of our two different perspectives is being packaged and handed over to whoever's listening, so that they can download it and think about it and go, and then come up with an idea, pass it on to their friend, and that's how the whole human race and all nature, all life, and maybe even including the rocks and the stars too, and all the swirlies and everything, is digesting these great issues. And it's not up to you, it's not up to me to digest the entire freaking thing. It's up to us to do our part as best we can. And you know, some people can lift, can bench press a little more than others, you know, mentally or emotionally or physically. And that's normal. But I mean, it's not necessarily a competition, except for people for whom it is. Sometimes I try to use competition. You know how people use, like, parents will try to use it on their kids. I'll try to use it on myself and say, well, I always end up unhappy about it, because it's not positive. It's maybe, I would call it evil if we were defining it the way that you're defining it with Chesed and Geburah. That if you say, come on, you want Tommy to win the race? Like, that's straight up evil by your definition. Like, or that's the realization of duality and the turning on of intentionally using of fear and pride and arrogance and all, like, cortisol and testosterone and on whatever level you're looking at it, on a kid to motivate them to what? To be a little stronger, to do a few more push-ups so that ultimately they'll be healthier? No, that's the wrong way to do it, I think. I think that there's certain kinds of karate where they emphasize kind of the spiritual aspect of it, and that it's for defense only, and you're all buddies afterward, and you fight, and then you're like good friends afterward, and like that's real healthy. But I think a lot of the Western sports kind of stuff is rooted in...
There's a warrior consciousness where the object is to annihilate your opponent, basically.
Yeah.
So that you can feel victorious.
And that's just around because people are still into it. I mean, my dad pointed that out. And
that all comes out of the energies of the personality astral triad. The animal soul, which is part of the foundation sphere, instinctual fight or flight, and the drive for power and control, which comes from the mental sphere.
But it all sounds like, from another point of view, it's like the great writer's room. Like you've got all, a certain choir of angels in the great writer's room of the astral plane or the physical plane saying, and then we're going to have ISIS show up and they're going to start cutting off people's heads and putting it on the internet. And it's like, oh, that'll be great. And then in season 6, we'll leave with a cliffhanger. And then Trump will come in, and it's like it's a big soap opera. My dad would call it a big soap opera.
Yeah, in my recent book, The Will of Divine Love, I've called it the drama and game of God's great adventure. One of the questions in the early part of the book that I use some responses to is the question, assuming that there's a God, this ultimate, perfect, eternal, non-created reality, which is complete and whole in itself. We could go on, but never...
Seems like a safe assumption to me.
Never wrap our mind around it.
Yeah, when they start saying, and his name is, that's when it starts to sound iffy.
Well, it's the ultimate mystery.
Right.
I mean, we can't... all of our ideas of it are not it.
Yeah.
They're simply pointers.
Little piece.
We're pointing towards it,
yeah.
hopefully,
yeah.
and it's not away from it with our ideas of it.
Yeah.
But the question arises that since this wonderful thing, this reality, is so complete and whole and perfect and eternal, why did it ever choose to make a creation? Because it's not like it needed something.
Well, I don't know. I think that I always think of that as a misappropriation or an error on the use of definition of the word why. I mean, because what is the word why, and what does it mean?
It's the question mark. It's the question mark. It's the question mark, and that's part of the answer to this. Is
right.
What's being proposed is there's 3 plausible reasons or answers to the question why.
Well, I'm still not set. I don't think the question makes sense.
You don't accept.
I think it's saying what's the difference between a mouse to say okay. Why did you go to the store? We ran out of bread. The bread was moldy. I threw it out. I went down to the store. Now we have bread. Okay. Like that's an appropriate use of the word why. Why did God create the universe? Okay, First of all, weren't we talking about an infinite all oneness? The infinite. Okay, so now we're talking about a past tense act of making. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions that go into the sentence even making any sense.
Well, I would say it's a present tense thing that's an ongoing.
Right.
Happening.
Yeah, I agree with
but
that. But I still don't think why works.
If we assume...
Why is one of the things it created.
If we assume time, we would have to assume that at some point there was a beginning of the creation. I mean, science refers to it as the Big Bang, for example.
But surely there was nothing thinking in English thoughts.
No. Well, just for the sake of discussion, let me violate your your sense of
no. I'm just challenging it. I'm not letting you get to the point.
And just say the question: why did God at some point choose to create? And we assume that happened because we find that here we are, we're part of a creation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we may be completely off base. It could be that this is totally timeless and endless and there never was a beginning. But just for fun, let's pretend that there was a point at which this supreme reality chose to create. 3 plausible answers is, 1, there was a curiosity. God wondered, what would it be like not to be God? I know what it's like to be God, because that's me. God, that is.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way to answer that question would be for this unlimited reality to enter into a state of limitation by making a creation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is represented, by the number 0 tarot arcana of the Fool, stepping off the cliff. That's God entering into creation. There's an uncertainty of, what's going to happen if I do this? Because I'm giving up being God.
Yeah.
And I'm creating. In order to create, there had to be your positive and negative polarity with energy flow between it to generate the creation. So that's like the first duality.
So gravity is
the
curiosity.
First limitation. Well, so the answer to what would it be like not to be God is happening through every one of us, every living creature in the whole creation, because God is one with all of us, and so through all of us, he's finding out all the possible ways there are not to be God, not to be that absolute, which is non-created, or the limitless light, in the Kabbalah. The second answer to the question, and this comes from the Eastern, religions of India, was that God wanted to make a Leela. He wanted to make a play, a drama, a dance. And so he created this Maya. He chose to create in order to have a drama, to have a play. And if you're going to have a drama and you're going to have a play, you need to have a plot. You need to have conflict. What better conflict than the conflict between
That's where I disagree with
evil.
Robert McKee, though.
Well,
I think that these are assumptions based on Greek drama. Okay, I'm sorry, go on.
Well, these are, to me, these are plausible answers.
No, you need conflict. You need
that
conflict
question.
to have a plot.
So there's the conflict, the struggle between good and evil is the archetypal conflict.
Yeah.
And then the third plausible reason for this is because this divine universal principle, non-created reality, is total love, complete, unconditional, infinite, total, eternal love. The nature of love is to overflow itself. It's effusive of itself. So in order to be effusive, it wants to share itself.
Yeah.
And so in order to share itself, it had to have someone to share itself with. And so that's us. The purpose, the higher purpose of our creation is that we may share and partake in and ultimately evolve into the divine evolve into the divine love.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 answers.
Cool.
And that the way that I'm visualizing this tree is how those answers are being implemented.
Yeah.
So this is like the spiritual moral triad. That's our spiritual nature. And then this lower one, the personality astral triad, this is our human ground, our human nature. When we are born into this, we've got the sphere of the emotions, which includes desires, feelings, also the imagination, the envisioning of what we desire, what we want, within the Maya primarily.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a really important sphere. The will is here.
Yeah.
And then over here we have the splendor sphere of intellect and intelligence And this is the sphere in which the ego identity is conceived, because it starts to reflect itself to itself as a separate self. I am.
Yeah.
This is the smaller I am, as opposed to this tip earth is the greater I am. So this is the I am, and then this is our instinctual nature. The serpent in the garden represents all of our basic instinctual needs and desires and motivations. The survival instinct, the reproductive instinct is part of that. The instinct for and the need for sensation and pleasure to affirm the goodness of life. The desire for affection, esteem, and approval, so we like ourselves and feel good about ourselves. The need for power and control.
Maybe
so,
the DNA molecule
which is our need
itself.
for personal freedom and independence.
Yeah.
But when these basic needs and the affection, esteem, approval correlates to the victory sphere, because that's emotional. And the power and control need correlates to the splendor sphere, because that's intelligence and intellect. And, really power and control comes from awareness and knowledge and being able to use that knowledge to get what we want.
Yeah.
And then the memory sphere, that's all our instinctual memory, which we share to some degree with the lower evolved life forms, inborn desires, the animal soul, and the passions, and so forth. And then the human being. So the human being down here inherits all of this, but what comes to consciousness is primarily the separate self-sense of the personality astral triad of ego identity. The question is whether it's going to live in harmony with these higher principles or go against them in its pursuit of happiness and fulfillment.
Or even in its pursuit of permanent separate self. That's a more Buddhist way of looking at it. If I am just, it's that old thing of it's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. That, if what does God want you to do? Oh, well, be nice to everybody, treat everybody like an extension of yourself, because really we're all one, yay. And then, so like a certain kind of created soul, maybe from this point of view, we'll look at that and go, fuck that, or whatever. I don't know why the southern accent, but, and say, in the name of being the opposite of that, I'm going to go get a tattoo, and or what, from a churchgoer's point of view, they see their kid go off and rebel and start listening to Megadeth and get some tattoos and some earrings, all specifically to not be one of those people chanting, "We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, Maker of heaven and earth, and all things seen and unseen." So that's where it gets weird. That's where the immediately. And that's right where it's weird. That's right where people get lost and phase out when you start talking about the struggle between good and evil in a context of Judeo-Christian symbolism.
Well, there's a real irony, I think, in the adolescent rebellion, because the adolescent rebellion is a necessary phase, part of an identity struggle to become your own person and not just be a product of cultural conditioning and programming that you get from your parents and your society and so forth. Yeah. And the heart of a rebellion is to try to become free. Yeah. Freedom is one of the cardinal spiritual values. For me, that's like love, truth, and freedom. Those are the cardinal values. Yeah. And so this attempt to be free becomes ironic, because a lot of the ways in which people choose to rebel actually makes them into more of a slave than they were.
That's true, like heroin, perfect example.
Addiction, various types of unhealthy addictions is a good example.
The heavy metal was originally Burroughs talking about addiction to heroin, and then they made a type of music out of it. But but as a spiritual heavy metal, like something that holds you down,
Well, the adolescent identity struggle, it has a requirement that you have to separate yourself and differentiate yourself from the conditioning.
Right. So with my dad being who he was, I had to become Catholic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Many times, if you look at people's life stories, you'll find that they they rebelled by becoming whatever the opposite was of what their parents were. I would think that, the guy Crowley that you talk about a lot,
his dad was
would
a
be
priest.
a prime example of that.
Yeah.
And so, people, because
but yet they're the same, because Crowley was
I'm-
very much a priest.
well, they don't realize that on the unconscious level, they've imprinted.
They're doing the same thing.
and they're programmed.
Yeah.
But they do it with
a different outfit.
outer trappings that are different.
I think that's why fashion keeps changing, is so that every generation can look at pictures of their forebears and say, well, I'm not like them. Look at those silly outfits.
They can think that they're different.
Yeah.
But so much of that
Different music.
is a shallow illusion, because what's motivating them, what they're really doing, is they're still trying to please their parents unconsciously.
Yeah.
So real freedom means getting free from
all
of
that.
that. For the original programming plus the pathological programming that is self-destructive. One of the cardinal definitions of the difference between good and evil is that good says yes to life and affirms our basic goodness and integrity and brings us to authentic love, truth, and freedom. And evil says no
To climate
to
change.
life. It
Okay.
says no to life and to creation.
Yeah.
It says no to affirming life. So it is essentially a path of self-destruction.
Yeah.
Both the energies of good and evil want to return to non-created reality.
Yeah.
Because that's the state of perfection and ultimate wholeness. But they go by different routes. The short, quick way is the evil path to self-destruction, which involves unconsciousness, entering through the gate at the bottom of the tree, which is
Going out the bottom
the
is how we
clippeth.
called it. Yeah.
the clippeth,
Yeah.
the
Or
the
keep
abyss.
hope. Yeah, yeah.
the abyss of annihilation. But the energy is returning, but there is no consciousness.
Yeah.
It's disintegration. And the other route is through the path of spiritual evolution, which means all the way back up the tree. And that can only be done by working in harmony with the laws of cosmic justice that affirm those universal values of love, truth, and freedom. Not their counterfeit imitations, which are the illusions
Yeah.
of the Maya and the traps,
And
that are laid.
the insidious thing about it is that usually the Maya and the illusions and the traps are, it's almost in, I mean, I could see where it's like I try to avoid, it's like part of me is like my dad, and so I'm always trying to like keep it over here so that people don't think I'm a nut, but then I start to sound like him, and I'm like, okay, I have to put a qualifier in here, but but it seems like sometimes that there's these demonic entities kind of piggybacking humanity that are looking for the next thing that's going to liberate the souls of people so that it can imitate it, sell it, package it, and shove it up its own, in order to make that which is truly sacred, truly profane. At which point they'll start enforcing things like, don't make things that are sacred profane, but at that point it's already profane. It's too late.
Yeah.
Once it's illegal, once blasphemy is illegal, blasphemy is the law of the land.
Well, I'll tell you, you've got a lot of your dad in you. That's a big compliment.
Oh, thank you.
That is a compliment. And wow. Well, let me see if I can gather my thoughts.
Sorry.
I had a couple of thoughts there that. Well, the illusion is a very, very slick and convincing counterfeit of the reality, and that's what's crept into a lot of organized religion and a lot of our cultural conditioning.
All but one. The Church of Assembly of God in Iowa, which one was it? That they're the ones that are going to heaven. The rest of them are all burning in hell. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. Well,
no, they're all various kinds of off. But I mean, even with the best of intentions, you can't do it without putting a little bit of your humanity in it, or a little bit of something creeps its way in. And but it's like a spectrum. You can go to one church or another and feel, okay, what we call Holy Spirit, maybe, is like when a lack of, okay, I don't mean to, sorry to take the reins for a second, but it's like when the body heals itself when you stop polluting it, when you stop making yourself sick, the immune system is there, and it naturally kicks in. So when you stop with when someone is able to get free of some of the neurosis, enough of them, a critical mass of it, and to be able to be humble, truly humble enough, and admit, and then they're a priest. You can see it, you can tell, because they're up there and they're really sincerely doing their best for the sake of the people in the audience. And then they go home and they say, "Did I do that right? I'm going to do better next week." And you can tell, and even that has a little bit of deception in it. And there's going to be deception that creeps into it. And there's going to be people that disagree with them. Yeah. But then there's all the other shades, that's as good as it gets.
There's many shades, and that's why I was talking about that spectrum of micro-spirituality.
Yeah.
Maybe we could go into that a little bit
totally.
later.
Yeah.
But because I think that's something that's very important.
We can put that.
All of us are relative combinations of neurosis and health, or evil and good.
Yeah.
Every human being, until we're completely liberated.
Yeah.
Into the divine light. Well, this maze that all of us are caught up into is so confusing that I think it's reasonable to assume that we don't have the perfect vision to find our straight and immediate way out of it. And this is coming back to this idea of the new esotericism.
Right.
So the idea is that this principle in us, which is one with us, it is aware of everything that the personality is doing, that it's going through. And it sees clearly because it is totally illumined by the higher powers of the higher spheres. So it knows the way out better than the ego down here does. And there needs to be a kind of a working partnership between this higher principle and the personality here in human ground. Now, the kind of a prayer or meditation that I'm proposing as a complement and a balance to the concentrative methods, which this part of us chooses and does, is a receptive kind of a practice in which, out of pure trust and faith in this higher principle, we allow ourselves to be the receivers of its work in us. So, and this is basically what the method of centering prayer is about. Mm-hmm. When a person practices this prayer, this meditation, they become receptive by consenting. This is the heart's essence of the prayer. By consenting, or at least having the intention of consenting to the presence and action of the divine in the soul. So I am consenting to whatever word we may want to use. Let's say God. I am consenting to God's presence and action in me. What I am doing when I do that is I am giving permission to this higher principle to have its way with me, to work in me. So when we enter into this prayer, we detach ourselves from the normal flow of thoughts that are going by and allow ourselves to rest in the space between the thoughts in an attitude of consent. Now this is actually an entryway into the invisible sphere on the tree, which is called, I call it Doth the Cloud, in reference to the cloud of unknowing. Mm-hmm. It's a sphere that cannot be conceived by the intellect. So it's beyond thought, image, word, feeling, desire. It's beyond any particular perception that we can have. The Greek term for this is apophatic, which means without images. So that's the opposite of all the practices, all the concentrative practices we referred to before. because they are with images.
Right.
They use the images. So this is why it balances it out. The Greek term for that is called cataphatic. That means with images. So the one doesn't replace the other, it complements it. It adds a deeper depth dimension. So let me just quickly describe the practical method of this prayer.
Okay.
And because when you're doing it, it seems like you're not doing anything. And of course, because of our conditioning, we think of meditation or prayer as an activity that I am going to do. But the way this works is if you do it, it does you.
Yeah.
So you have to give it permission to do you.
Yeah.
Trusting that because your intention is to align with a divine principle in you, that what's going to happen, what's going to be activated is the positive in you, not the negative.
Yeah.
So, first of all, you choose a simple word of 1 or 2 syllables as a symbol of your intention to consent to the divine presence in action within. You choose any word. It can be in any language. Any word
just
you
for
want.
the sake of full transparency, when I was going through my process, I used the phrase "I am a yogi" as my equivalent of that, with all the implications of that.
Well, that's too many words.
No, I'm
for
not
this.
saying for them to do it. I'm just saying that that's what I used. Because that includes surrender to God,
That-
which is the
I am a yogi would
fifth.
be a good affirmation.
Right.
Or a good active prayer sentence to repeat to yourself mentally as you go through the day. But for doing this kind of prayer of meditation, it's really a movement into the simplicity of now.
So I give permission
word-
to the God. I give permission to something that is not me.
Well, that's what
to
you're
be
going
in
to.
me.
Well, it is you.
I already take for granted that there's duality, and it seems sort of S&M-y to me. I mean,
that's kind of what you're giving permission to is your own higher nature.
Again, I mean that
Your own
says
true-
it's outside of you.
It's not outside. It's outside of your ego personality.
Right.
Out of your consciousness. But it's really your true self.
But we're assuming that the I, the subject in that sentence, is that ego and not the higher self that's talking.
You don't say a sentence when you're doing this practice.
But if you say, I give permission to God to have his way with me, then you're identifying twice with the ego, and you're saying once that you're not God in that sentence.
Well,
That's a horrible affirmation.
You're not using that affirmation.
Okay.
You choose what you're going to use, but
I prefer I am a yogi.
okay, use that as your affirmation, but don't try to use it for this kind of prayer.
Okay.
Because for this type of meditation or prayer, you want a very simple word of only 1 or 2 syllables. You could use the word like now, or love, or Kyrie. It could be in a different language, but it doesn't matter what word you use, as long as it's not something that's going to trigger a lot of associations and thoughts. Because what we're trying to do is to step back from our thinking process and be detached from it. So you choose a word, and the word is simply a symbol of the intention of consenting to the divine presence in action in you. And it's your true self that you're consenting to. It's not something outside of you or alien to you.
I mean, I hate to point out, but that sounds like an error in logic to say that I am talking to my true self.
Well, if you look at this tree of life, if you can accept that this tree of life is a map of your soul, of the microcosm.
I mean, I talk to myself, but I mean, I admit that it's crazy.
Everything that is on this tree is part of you, but most of the time, you're not conscious of. But it is you.
Right.
It's not something outside of you. What we're conscious of most of the time is our ego identity as a particular human identity and personality.
I mean, just to clarify,
here.
what I'm saying is true, though. If I say, I am consenting to the divine to have his way within me, I, in that sense, is the ego. The divine is the true self that we're assuming we're unconscious of.
Most of the time.
And then the third time I say within me, I'm talking again about my ego. Right?
What we're doing, See, we have a will in this personality astral triad.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as our will is to maintain the status quo of our patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, and acting, and relating to others and so forth, this principle leaves us alone and allows us that freedom.
Right.
So when we use our prayer word as a symbol of consent to the divine, we're giving this principle permission to work in us on this level to bring about purification, healing, and transformation. That's all it is. It's very simple.
Yeah. If
we are spiritual
I don't
aspirant,
disagree, but I also would say that another way to put that would be that if you stop hurting yourself, then the automatic function of healing will kick in. And if it helps to, it's like at the beginning of the Golden Dawn system, and you learn later when you're an adept, that everyone that was visualizing what was going on while you were going through your initiation was thinking of you as dead matter at the very beginning. And when they said, here's some water I'm going to splash on you, suddenly you came to life. And it's a whole process you go through. It's an alchemical thing. But when you charge a talisman, it starts off as nothing but just a piece of dead wood. And then you charge it, and then it's a talisman. And so that's the formula. And that's the assumptions behind this system, is that you're bringing in these peasants. You're bringing in these unwashed people that, clearly they've got it all bass-ackwards. And so to give them a concept like, you must pray to your higher self to enter into you, for one thing, is going to remind them of church. And for another thing is an error in logic. It's untrue. That's not them. They're not their ego. The higher self they're praying to is their true self. And you don't, in the Golden Dawn, you don't reveal that until the 6th grade. But Crowley came out and said, hey, everybody! And so they've all read those books, and so it's like yesterday's news. And I appreciate that that you've been working with so many people on the Christian side of the world, because they need people like us, you and I, to be willing to do that. And I was willing to do that for a long time, and I did do that, and I've stopped. And now that I'm openly friends with the S&M and Satanic community, I'm automatically out of phase with people who insist that I mustn't do things like that, so I'm keeping it real. I'm just being real. This is what I think of the Golden Dawn system.
Honesty is the road to freedom. The truth,
yeah. I'm in process. I haven't arrived anywhere. I'm not saying I'm the guru. I'm just saying I no longer abide by these assumptions, and they imprisoned my mind for many years, and so I'm kind of reacting against them.
Well, what I'm trying to present to you is aimed for all of us at giving us more freedom.
I know.
Let me go a little further here.
Okay.
So you choose a word of 1 or 2 syllables as a symbol of the intention of consenting to the divine presence and action in the soul. And then to start the meditation, you sit in a comfortable position with your back straight and your eyes closed. And you very gently introduce your sacred symbol by repeating it in your mind to affirm your intention. And you're allowing yourself to become more aware of the immediate present moment. And then after you've affirmed that attention, you stop repeating the sacred symbol, and you simply allow yourself to rest in the space between your thoughts with this inner attitude of consenting to your true self, present and active in you. And you spend like a period of about 20 minutes like that. Now, while you're doing this, if you notice that you've become engaged with any of your perceptions or thoughts, you renew your intention by returning to your sacred word. So the thoughts are like boats going down the river, down the stream of consciousness. They're a normal part of the prayer.
Yeah.
And a couple of the the real principles in the prayer is, one, you do not judge the prayer, because that's a thinking thing. You don't judge the prayer. Am I doing it right? Or this is boring? Or, oh, this piece feels good. You don't self-reflect and comment on it, and you don't have expectations for it, of what it's supposed to be like. What you do, or what I do, what we do in practicing this, is we simply accept that whatever happens during the time we're doing the prayer is the divine will for us at the moment. So we're surrendering this time to our relationship with the divine. We cannot make our mind stop thinking. The imagination is a perpetual motion machine. But something that does happen and will happen during this prayer is that the divine presence is able, because we're consenting, it's able to come down this energy pathway into our personality astral triad. And when it does that, it has the ability to quiet our faculties of memory, intellect, and imagination. So there will be times when the mind does become really quiet, and we are drawn down into this deeper absorption, and we might lose awareness of our physical body at that time. We go into this quiet place of spaciousness, and it's like you don't know where you are, but you know you're somewhere. You're conscious, but you're not asleep, but there's no object of consciousness. It's consciousness without an object. So there's no particular thing that you're conscious of. You're just in this state of quiet rest and absorption.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're in that state and you're in the attitude of consenting, this divine principle starts working as it sees it needs to do on the unconscious patterns and forces in the personality astral triad, which starts to bring about the inner healing and transformation. And then after that, and you may go into this state of absorption just for a few seconds, maybe for half a minute or a minute or two, or maybe even longer. It differs at different times. It's not something that we can bring about. It's something that happens spontaneously. We just sort of fall into it. It's kind of like a gap in consciousness between the particular perceptions. So when we speak of thoughts in this prayer, thoughts is an umbrella term that includes not only our thinking processes, memory, imagination, and intellect, images, feelings, and so forth, awareness of our perceptions of things that are going on in our body, but also perceptions of things that are going on around us in the physical environment. All of these things are thoughts. So we simply allow whatever is there to be there as what's in the present moment. We don't try to resist or stop the thoughts. We don't react to them. And we don't engage or get involved with them. Because all of those things take us out of the meditation. And these are traps. And everybody falls into them. Once you notice you've fallen into it, you don't beat yourself up about it. You simply objectively return to your symbol and resume the prayer. And you allow it.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like an increasing kind of self-awareness. And then, because we're consenting, the real work of this prayer, and this is the esoteric part of it, the real work of this prayer goes on in secret in the unconscious. It does not matter. And if you can get this point, it makes the whole thing really easy. It doesn't matter what the conscious content of your experience is while you're doing the prayer. Because you're consenting, this principle is working in the unconscious and doing the work. And we don't see what's going on. So it's so esoteric, it's so occult and secret that
we're not asking, what are we asking?
We're not asking for anything.
We're just saying, I consent.
We are consenting
for you to move within me,
to the will of our true self in us. That's all it is. It's a movement into simplicity.
Yeah.
The temptation...
I mean, you have to understand, though, that for someone who maybe, for example, many of the audience members for 20 years have been starting every morning with make all spirits subject unto me, so that every spirit of the firmament and the ether, identifying 100,000% with being there, what we would call higher self, walking through the day, that this is taking several steps backwards.
Well, I wouldn't say backwards. It's taking a step inwards.
Okay.
It's taking a
the phraseology, at least, of saying, I surrender to my will to my higher self to work within me.
You're not saying any of that.
Or I consent.
It's an attitude.
Rather than
It's
reject.
an attitude of consent and cooperation with the best that's in me.
Right.
The true self. It's simply giving permission to the true self to do what needs to be done to heal me and help me move forward, so that I can, in daily life, more and more become a living expression of that which I aspire to.
Yeah.
So it's a cooperation between the ego, the lower ego personality, human identity.
It sounds
and
very
our
compatible.
Spiritual identity.
It sounds very compatible with, and it sounds. I've practiced it before. And it sounds very compatible with this system, and it sounds very compatible with Christianity. There's a lot of people that are so allergic to Christianity that this would make them not want to do. It's too familiar.
Well,
it's too much like that. And then there's other people who aren't familiar at all with Christianity, in which case it would just be sort of odd.
Well, this doesn't have to be in a Christian frame of reference, is what I'm saying.
What I'm pointing out is the unconsciously held assumptions behind it are, and I'm pointing out what those are.
We assume that there's a
divine.
Frustrated
trying to do it.
We assume there's a divine principle in us.
Mm-hmm.
The particular name we attach to it, or the tradition or no tradition, that's a secondary matter. So the person doing this simply needs to use what they feel rings true to them.
Right.
If you believe that there is a divine part of you, you can do this. If you believe that there isn't, then why would you be doing any type of esotericism?
Well,
wouldn't be.
We could break down that whole thing that you just said, and I could point out all the assumptions there. I don't know. Maybe we could move on to another subject or take a break or something.
Well, let me finish. I haven't presented all this yet.
Okay.
But we will move on.
Okay.
One thing that's a very fundamental principle is that without trust, there is no relationship. Without trust, there's no relationship. Whether it's with another person or with this divine principle. So if a person doesn't have trust and faith in the divine principle within them, there is absolutely no point in doing this. If the person is distrustful for whatever reason, then there's no point in doing this, because it's not going to work.
Yeah.
There has to be trust. And that's true in any relationship we have.
The worst is when there's trust and it's betrayed, though.
Well, and that's a wounding that it makes it harder to trust in the future.
Possible. Yeah.
When you've been burned, you're afraid of getting near that fire.
Yeah.
You're afraid to make yourself vulnerable by trusting. But without trust and vulnerability, there is no intimacy. There's no depth and meaning in a relationship. So there's a risk and a reward dynamic. Whether it's the relationship I have with myself, which is what this is all about, or my relationship with another person, or if I'm relating to God as something outside of me, or my relationship with the cosmos, any relationship can only develop in an atmosphere of trust. Willingness to be vulnerable, to self-disclose, to be truthful, and to share. And of course it's a two-way street. I reveal myself to the other reveals herself, himself, or itself to me. And as we do that, our relationship deepens. We know each other on a deeper level. And there's more intimacy. It requires more trust because there's more vulnerability. Because the more you've exposed, the more bad you can get burned. The more it hurts when you're betrayed, the more you've trusted. But the more reward there is because there's more intimacy and closeness, the more fulfilling and meaningful the relationship can be.
I'm suspect of the fact that the people who insist that this is a ladder and we're at the bottom and we got to climb our way up to the top are the same people that are selling something. And I don't buy it. And I never bought it. And I played along for a long time. And then I stopped. And I think that, well, I have some people that want me to help them build a Golden Dawn temple in Africa. And they're always asking me, why is it important to practice Golden Dawn? I'm like, it's not. I mean, it's really not, But because our fucking missionaries came over there and messed with you guys, then maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe you guys ought to have a Golden Dawn temple. But it's a stepping stone. And don't lose your own spirituality. Don't get further into this. And so I'm in that position where I'm like, really? You want me to teach you Golden Dawn? God damn it. All right. But I mean, I'm teaching it like this, but they want to learn it anyway. But I mean, it kind of works.
Well, maybe they feel a need for a system.
Yeah.
They don't feel they can do it on their own. I mean, that's the purpose of the systems, is something to help us to help ourselves.
It's more like they feel like we stole the mysteries from Egypt / Africa, and now we have them on display at places like the British Museum where the Golden Dawn was created based on it, rather than them being able to do stuff with them, and so it's, they want to kind of like steal it back, and I'm like, okay, here it is, shoveling it back to Africa, saying this is what it looks like now. We fucked with it, sorry. But there's some God forms in it, but it's mostly like just blowing itself and putting Christianity at the heart of itself, and bringing in all the pagan elements of Europe and assigning them different saint names, but doing it in an esoteric way, and so that it seems more cool. I don't know. I'm enraged. I'm sorry.
Well, basically, I mean, one of the most fundamental principles of spirituality is that everything any of us needs to know, we already have within us.
Yeah.
We have the divine DNA in us, the imprint, and that's what this is. This Tippereth, this beauty, the center, the true center of the soul. It contains the master plan. We don't need to go outside of ourselves to find what we really need.
Then what are we doing? Why are we here? We're wasting time. I mean, what is this then? Why are we teaching this? Why are people listening to a podcast? They should turn it off and listen to the silence so they can actually have this thing that we're talking about, that we're taking away from them, the same way that this does.
It's because we are so caught up and confused in this Maya that we can't do that on our own. We need something to give us some help and some guidance.
I guess, yeah.
And that's all this method of centering prayer is. It's a very simple method through which a person can access their deeper inner self.
Yeah.
And if you do the method, it'll do you. But if you don't trust it, it's obviously not going to work.
Well, no, the simplicity of, the mantra thing is the mantra thing. That's not new. We know. We can
This
call it,
isn't the mantra thing.
Picking a word and saying it and not letting your mind wander from it is a very old Indian method.
There's a little subtlety. When I told you about this, you choose a word as a symbol of consenting to the divine presence and action in, but you don't keep repeating it like a mantra. You just repeat it a few times to affirm your intention. Then you stop repeating it.
Right.
And you only use it when you notice you've gotten distracted by one of the thoughts.
It seems like a good method to use if someone has a tool chest of methods that they use. It seems like a bad method that someone could, in a position of guru, tell their student that they have to do every day, and that very scenario has been done many, many, many a time. That said, are there other subjects? I think we've exhausted that.
You want to move on. You want to move on from this. Well,
I disagree with consenting to my higher self to operate within me, even though I probably have and will continue to use that method. I just, rationally disagree. And I think that, there's going to be people that really feel strongly about that, and I agree with them, that this isn't useful. This is old. This is Piscean technology. This is stuff that needs to be improved upon.
Well, I've found, and I know several other people have found, that if you do this regularly for 20 minutes twice a day,
if you do anything for 20 minutes
it produces some very good results.
Yeah.
Which you notice not necessarily during the time when you're doing this meditation, but you notice it in your daily life and interactions with other people.
Yeah.
It improves your quality of life. And it is the work of your own divine deep inner self within you.
Yeah.
So it's a free choice. I mean, this isn't something you can tell somebody they have to do. It's something that is offered. The person is free to choose yes or no, to do it or not.
Yeah.
It's simply between you and your inner self. There's nobody that's going to ask you if you've been doing it.
But I mean, surely that's... anyone who knows a little bit of English would know the absurdity of the statement, it's between you and your inner self. I mean, that you're talking to yourself in a mirror? Yes.
You have a relationship to yourself. How much do you trust yourself? That's kind of a question here. If a person distrusts doing this prayer,
well, let's get rid of the tree of life here, and let's just ask that question. So, how much do you trust yourself? Okay.
And you find, if you look, that there is different parts of ourself with which we identify. Which parts do we trust more? Which parts do we trust less?
Yeah.
There are parts of us that urge us to do impulsive things that we may later regret.
And we've been tempered by wisdom, by
there are parts
harsh
of us,
experience.
There are parts of us that may advise us to do what is in our interests, and there's parts of us that advise us to do what's not in our interests.
And there's methods. Now, the method I grew up, what they learned, what they taught us in church was, you close your eyes and put your hands together. And I still do this in yoga, but, I mean, you close your eyes and you ask God, and you stay silent, and then you're open to what comes to you. And that sounds similar to what you were describing, and hence being compatible with that. But I mean, there's a certain mechanism that's happening when you do that. It's very interesting. But I think that there's 1,001 billion ways to tap into that mechanism. And that higher self and me versus you, and there's two of us, and we're having a conversation. I mean, I just learned the other day that the Abramelin work was so that you could invoke Jiminy. I mean, like you could invoke your holy guardian angel in the sense of that movie, that people watch on Christmas time, where the guy shows up and said, like literally, it's you're supposed to have a dialogue with a being that's separate from you, and it's an angel that was assigned to you by some kind of hierarchical something rather. And it's like, okay. I mean, I've been talking to beings. I mean, maybe, I remember the first time I had a guide, it was named Luke, and he wore a yellow suit, and he was hilarious. But, I mean, I don't think that that's my true self. Maybe it's an aspect of myself. It's a character maybe I put out there. Or maybe it's something, I don't know where the Akashic record begins and where my own experience with it ends, or if there's a difference, or if that dissolves when the body dies. I'm not sure. I don't know if the separate self is a temporary phenomenon or what, and I'm not really worried about it. I used to worry about that, and part of what happened for me in my meditative journey was kind of coming off of that and not needing a separate self. And I mean, reading some Buddhist texts, they talk about the more you cling to a separate self, the more you're in hell. And it's like, isn't that true? That's very true. And you could apply that in a Western sense too, but like Alan Watts ran into in the 50s, when you try to introduce Eastern wisdom in Western mind, I mean, I think he actually succeeded more than he realized. Because if you look at the Episcopal Church now, they're kind of right on board with a lot of those concepts. At least from what I know. Maybe there's another side to it that I'm not aware of, but every Episcopal priest I know is kind of like, well, that's cool that you're doing the Esoterinerd podcast. I'm like, really? you're a priest, like, but the one Catholic priest I know won't get back to my emails.
Well, something I can tell you that's interesting regarding the Episcopals is in a lot of their seminaries they are teaching centering prayer.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new thing to them. But they are very open to many different ways of developing spirituality.
Yeah.
Beyond the more traditional, and I would say rather limited approaches that box people in, that you've been basically complaining about, that people get stuck in and need to break out of.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm feeling my sickness coming back. I don't know if it's connected to what
sickness.
Yeah. I've had this throat illness. I'm feeling dizzy again. But
dizzy.
Yeah, I don't know if that's connected to the conversation, but no. But I mean, I think there's stuff there on the track, but what a trip. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry to have been so confrontational about it, but yeah.
Well, you have a lot of sensitivities, and
yeah.
This practice does not come out of a lot of the things that you're very defensive against.
Well, it's a practice for Episcopal priests, and like.
Well, they've been using it in some of their seminaries.
Yeah.
But it's,
I mean, I know that your calling is to bring as much esotericism as they can handle to communities that most esotericists avoid.
Well, there's a very serious need for
and that's very
a deeper spirituality,
self-sacrificing of you, and I acknowledge that. I mean, that's beautiful. I just
well, I was called to it. I didn't.
Yeah.
Initially, I didn't want to get involved in this.
Yeah.
But there was a kind of a call that I received. I mean, I actually had an experience, where I was lifted out of myself and energized, and this presence was there non-verbally urging me to share centering prayer with people up in Alaska where I was living. Yeah. And I was resistant because I knew that in order to do that, I would have to get involved with the Catholic Church again. And I kind of dropped out of that when I was about 14 years old. Because I got really...
They're kind of slow to come along.
I got really turned off to it for some of the exact reasons that you've mentioned, and reasons why a lot of other people have left it.
Yeah.
And, it has its dark and its light side. It's like every organization, whether it's an esoteric society or a government or political party or a religious group, any organization is made up of people that have false selves and true selves.
Right.
And so the organization's going to have itself, its own false self and its own true self.
Yeah.
And we know from studying history that the church has had a major false self because of all of the corruption and abuses that have occurred over the centuries.
Well, but
it's not 100% false.
There's a consensus among the group mind that I came from that I disagree with, which is that that ultimately this whole good and evil test is real simple. If they accept Jesus, they're good, and if they reject Jesus, well, then they're evil. The chief adept of the order I came from said that his ex-wife, in attacking him, was attacking Jesus because it was an order of light. So therefore, she's of the devil, for instance. And that made sense at the time for some reason, for everybody that didn't leave when he said that. Muslims, obviously evil. Obviously, I'm not serious. I'm not serious. But people who who look at the ones that'll be real quick to be like, there's another Muslim killer. Oh, it's because they're Muslim, and they didn't accept Jesus. And really, we're still beating ourselves up for not converting those areas more thoroughly before Muhammad came around and his people got to them. There's, this whole thing, if you ask an Orthodox priest, they'll say, well, yeah, we're still kicking ourselves for not converting those areas. But and then Satanism, of course. You know, I mean, that goes without saying. Those idiots over in Hollywood with the tattoos and the S&M and the Satanism, they're surely not a part of the greater body of Christ that is going to be the ascended New Jerusalem, when the old Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem, when God comes down, then surely they'll be smited and they'll be in the lake of fire. There's these assumptions, is what I'm getting at. And I'm my version of, I mean, I have the tattoo, you know, I'm Christian, you know, but my version of Christianity includes everyone. When St. Paul says we are all parts of the body of Christ and each part has a different function, that includes Satanism, you know, that includes, and that's where I differ with 99.999, put a line over it,
yeah, well,
of everybody
I am
who
with
would
you on
self-identify
that.
as a Christian.
I believe that every human being, no matter who they are or what they are, has that same divine indwelling in them.
But then, like Stephen Colbert made fun of the, you know, there's an infinite number of paths toward accepting Jesus Christ as your personal savior. But I don't even throw that. I'm not coming from that standpoint. You know, I'm coming from.
Well, that's a very exoteric.
Yeah.
It's totally exoteric.
Yeah.
Where you're thinking of Jesus Christ as an external being, an entity,
right, that
you are to worship.
As
rather than awakening to that Christ that's within you,
right?
It's in everybody.
Well, I mean, if we and a lot of people are left brain oriented, and while we have their ear, you know, what do we mean by that? So Christos, that means anointed one. That refers to when olive oil was poured on you at the end of the inner order initiation in the rites of Eleusis, and it was sort of a weird nickname to have when you're a rabbi in Palestine, circa 180 or whatever. Other than that, though, what does it mean?
Son of God.
Christos? I thought it means anointed one.
Well, Messiah.
Oh, Messiah.
Going back to the tree of life. I guess you didn't want to. The word.
Yeah. No, I mean the real meaning, like the
ben.
Not the misunderstanding, but the.
One of the Hebrew words for Tippereth is ben, which means son of Ab, which means father, which is a Hebrew word for Chokmah, the wisdom. So the Christos that's within us is the one and only Son of God, which is produced by the Divine Father and the Divine Mother, and that's the true center of every individual soul. So that is in all of us, and we are all in it. So with that, and it's through that we are all one.
Yeah.
In the Christos, or in the Son of God. That doesn't mean that the Son of God is an ego identity that's separate from everybody else that we all have to bow down to. That's an exoteric misinterpretation,
right.
Misunderstanding of the Christ principle.
So I guess in that sense, it's like the Ba and the Ka, where the Ka in the Egyptian sense is the self that continues to live after the Ba is destroyed. But then that brings in these afterlife assumptions and these sort of survival chakra. It's an illusionary survival chakra issue. People, like someone I'm going to be interviewing in a couple of weeks, I've been watching his posts, and he's not the only one, but like there's a lot of people hung up on, am I going to continue to exist as a separate soul with feet after I'm dead? And that's the ultimate question, and really the mysteries all go back to that question in Egypt. And they had this whole elaborate system to make sure that the pharaoh would have his slippers in the afterlife and not get devoured by the animal thing. And the whole point is if you surrender to Osiris/Jesus, then he'll be nice to you, and even though the old scriptures say that you should be devoured by the alligator thing, you'll get to be eternal too because God's forgiving. Therefore, pay your taxes and shut up, peasants. Yeah. And that's really, what most people think of when they think of Christ.
A lot of this is a fear of death. The ego has a fear of its own death or own extinction, and it wants reassurances and guarantees because its survival center is kind of traumatized by the idea of death and annihilation.
Yeah.
And so much of religion is simply trying to shore up
that energy,
counteract that fear.
Right? Now they just use porn and shame. It's post-Puritan.
Well, what I believe, I hope this doesn't irritate you.
No.
What I believe is this, that this tree of life is a universal symbol. It represents both the macrocosm of all creation and the microcosm of each individual soul. Now, in each human incarnation, in each lifetime, the human ground, the human personality, consists of the bottom four spheres on the tree, the personality, astral triad, and the physical human body.
The flux capacitor.
And so the sense of who we are as a human being, our human identity as an individual ego or separate self, is tied up in the physical body and its identification with the outer things like its cultural conditioning and all that, and its habits, its thoughts, and its feelings and its desires. And so there's an awareness that we're going to die. And so there is kind of a fear. Now, as I think we've discussed this before, as you know, within each of these spheres is a smaller tree of life.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the spheres are also within each of the spheres. When somebody actually physically dies, their physical body is destroyed, it decays or it's cremated, and the experiences of this particular personality in lifetime, they are absorbed into this principle as a memory and as a learning experience. And then at some point there's going to be a new incarnation, so a new physical body will be born, and a new configuration of the personality astral triad will take place and be connected to it. Yet in the deep unconscious,
so the
these
Christ
memories
is who
will
you
still
are in the bardo, by that definition, basically.
Yeah.
In between lives, you're that is you. When you're in between lives, if you were to say I, which you wouldn't, because you don't have a mouth, but if you were to, then you'd be saying God.
You recover a memory.
But when
of
you
who
are
you
born
are
as a separate self and you say I, then for practical purposes, when you're at the store and they say, who's next? You say I, you're not talking about God, you're talking about the little monkey that just raised its hand.
your human identity.
Right.
I'm next in this line.
And 100% of the time most people say I, they're referring to their separate self.
Exactly. That's what we're identified with. And that's normal and natural.
When you're taught how to say you and I, you're taught that's...
Your name is so-and-so. Right away you're tagged with an identity
Yeah.
as a separate human being. You're Edward.
Right.
I'm Kess.
So how come that's the same word, I, that we use when we talk about God in the highest sense? I.
Well,
I am.
it's a term of self-reference. And so when we're identified with this self, we say I.
But who's the we that gets identified with that self?
Each of us gets identified with our own personal identity as a human being, but also we have this higher identity. So when we remember our true self,
And we say I, and
we
that's
say
the one we're
I,
talking
but
about.
then our self-reference is
Right.
to this. So
Like when Willem Dafoe was Jesus.
I believe that when a person actually dies and they come up out of their physical body, they regain a memory of this identity, and there's a sense of detachment from this. And they realize that they remember this is who they really are, and this is like the role and the identity they've had in the chapter of God's great drama and adventure that they've just played as an actor, as a human being. But it's only one in a series of human identities that they have had and that they're likely to have in the future.
Right. Huh.
So, at some point, if the soul has need for more incarnations in order to master the lessons and work through the karma it's created in human ground, then it's going to be necessary to take another human incarnation.
Yeah,
And play the whole thing out again with a totally new human identity, born in with new parents, into a new environment, and so forth, which hopefully matches what the needs of this individual soul is for its learning, growth, and working out of its karma.
Yeah.
It might have to wait a long time until the right conditions come along that meet its needs. once all these lessons have been mastered, then it's a voluntary thing whether or not to incarnate. And the only reason to do so would be for the purpose of assisting others in their evolution, out of compassion. But it's necessary for us to keep reincarnating until we've learned all the lessons and passed through the whatever they are, the transformations or the tests of the human experience, which is very involved. Do you think of all the possibilities? There's an awful lot of them.
Yeah.
And you couldn't possibly exhaust them all in one lifetime. I mean, that's another part of the exoteric belief system, is that we only have one single life as a human being, and if we don't do what was required for our salvation in that one life, then
better hurry.
It's an eternal tragedy, because we're never going to get another opportunity. And it's been said that the teaching of a series of lives was part of the original Christianity, but the controllers took it out because they felt that people would be complacent, thinking, well, if I don't make it this life, I've got more, so I don't need to worry about it. But if you bring in the dogma that you have one and only life, in which your eternal future of either heaven or hell is going to be determined, then that puts you under a little more stress.
Right.
And of course, if you really 100% believed and bought into that, you would be very careful in how you live this life. And if you look at most exoteric Christians, though consciously they'll say they believe this, on a deeper level I think they know it's not true, because they're not living their lives as though this was their one and only opportunity.
Interesting.
Well, think about it.
So you're saying most Christians believe in reincarnation?
Well, I don't think they... I think that every soul on a deep unconscious level knows that that's true. I'm not saying that they believe in it, particularly on the level of their human personality. Of course they don't believe in it. That's an evil belief to them. You could be condemned
on a
for
certain
that.
level. It seems to me like it's fun to pretend that Lord of the Rings is real, but it's easier to to grok the I don't want to talk shit about all of Western religion.
Yeah.
You have too many considerations about who's listening.
Well, I do think about it. I don't want to confuse people or, have
I know, but they're going to be confused as hell
misunderstanding.
listening to what I said in response to what you were saying.
Well, you can edit out whatever, either of us said that you want.
No, I know the standard real well. I don't necessarily agree with it. I challenge the standard, and I mean, when I challenged it, you just repeated yourself.
I wasn't sure if I was getting across to you.
No, I understand the standard. I'm very well.
What do you mean by the standard?
School don't know this. The whole concept of this is the goof, this is where the body is, this is the nefesh, which is part of the ruach, this is the lesser neshama, this is the greater neshama, this is the chia, this is the yechida. There's all these different divisions of the self. God's up here. We have all these different interfaces between here and God. You got to go up all these paths. You got to confront the fucking bad guy at the end of round 2. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to inspire poetry and fiction and Tolkien-esque role-playing from now until Kingdom Come. But as far as a map of my soul, as far as the definition of my soul, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. That's as far as I go with it. I don't believe it. You were saying this is what you believe. I find it interesting. I went through and came out the other side. I went out the top. They made me a chief, and I gave myself permission to leave, and said I'm done with this shit, I mean, maybe the audience is confused. Maybe they're going to be confused, But, I mean, so a lot of them are just learning the standard. They're like, I just started the Golden Dawn. This is all new to me. And it's like, so this is good stuff. It's like, well, okay, you commune with your higher self. The higher self is represented by the Hierophant, the one you took the oath to when you were bound and shackled and you were kneeling in front of the altar.
See, I didn't go through any of that stuff.
No, yeah, I mean, but that's at the root of all of these assumptions. And I don't necessarily buy the assumptions. I think that it like I look at these assumptions, everything that you've said, as an anthropologist who has time traveled to this particular incarnation in order to fuck around here and see what's going on, you know, and interact and see how everybody's doing. And a lot of people are hung up on this idea of some kind of upward mobility, not necessarily in a yuppie sense, but in a spiritual sense, where ultimately it's driven by a fear of ceasing to exist and a desire to be a god or an archangel, and ultimately, or one with God or whatever, you know, like to experience that great acid trip you had once. Not you, I mean me, I mean both of us. You know, forever, to get there, the long way around. The yogis, maybe they know. They're on the other side of the world. I didn't check with them yet. Maybe they know, you know, the way to experience the acid peak forever without having to shell out, you know, because eventually you take acid 4 days in a row, it stops working. So, you know, I know, right? And so you want to live happily ever after forever, right? And I've been there. And you know, the Golden Dawn holds the promise of that way over here, you know, and then never delivers. And Paul Foster Case and all of these systems, Crowley, that are derivative of Golden Dawn, are using all the same veil dance, the same tools of deception, the same. You know, or, I mean, again, like I said, if you really are a brick at the, you know, if the neophyte coming in really is totally confused, really has nothing to go on but some fundamentalist, racist parents and grew up in a shack, then the Golden Dawn is for you, because by the time you come out the other side of it, you'll have a pretty good idea what's going on. But you also have the option to come out the other side of it and say, I am a soldier for Christ, and these are the end times. You can do that. You can approach it that way. Or you can wake up, you know, or whatever, you know, like, or you can try to fuse it with some kind of Eastern system just out of shits and giggles, out of nothing better to do, and see if you can have a new system be born out of it just by implication, or inspire other people to do it too, just by hanging a couple of kake jikus in the background behind you in a Golden Dawn sanctuary, like I did. Or you can put on a golden mustache and go to cosplay, you know. I'm much more from like a Doctor Who kind of multiverse. It's all kind of like a big honeycomb, you know, and we're all one and we're all separate. It's non-dual, like the Easterners say. It's not one and it's not two. It's all dancing, you know, together, and Buddhas alone together with other Buddhas, you know, and for me that speaks to me. You know, is the Buddha lands are not red, gold, blue, or white. The Buddha lands are what is behind the eyes. The Buddha lands, you know, are one single white pearl that goes on forever in all 10 directions. And the Great Void is not called the Great Void because it is empty. It's because it is teeming with life, and flowers in space are born and die in space. These are all things that speak to me with far more depth than anything about that tree of life. And Athanasius Kircher, the Jesuit in Germany, trying to secretly weed some wisdom out of the secret teachings from down in Spain, in spite of the fact that his overlords might look over his shoulder and barbecue him, you know. I mean, it's a beautiful system for breaking out of, you know, getting barbecued by the Inquisitor. But if that's not where you're at, then it's kind of like it's going backwards.
So would you say you've become disillusioned with the tree?
No, I've just come. I've learned it through and through. I've learned its limits. I've learned that it has limits. I've learned that it's a very interesting flower. And some people worship that flower, and they want to eliminate all the other flowers and make that the flower that everybody learns. And, I mean, on some level, they think that, well, if everybody knew the tree of life, then there'd be... And maybe that's part of what's motivating me. Maybe that's why I'm making the Esoterinerd podcast, is because I want people to learn the tree of life, but I also want them to hear what I'm saying right now.
To know its limitations.
Yeah, to know that it has limitations, that you can learn it, and it'll help you learn about yourself, it'll help you learn about your ancestors, it'll help you learn about your culture, it'll help you learn about the funny symbols on the back of the dollar bill, and that's it. You know, and then you can move on. It's not something to imprison you, and it's designed to imprison you. It's an elaborate Venus flytrap, and you end up in the middle, you know, and all this stuff is going on around you, and it's this elaborate dance which is fun sometimes and shitty other times, and you can get stuck there. And it's not necessary. But the thing is, some of the people that they think it's necessary, and I spent so many years on autopilot, which is now kind of universally agreed by the people that were in my same position as being oath autopilot. That we took an oath, we took a fucking serious oath to always show up to work on time, every fucking day, and never receive a paycheck. And we did it. And that's crazy in this day and age, you know. It's crazy. That's just crazy. And yeah, you're right. I do have a lot of buttons about it. And but I mean, I want to point out, you know, like I used to tell my friend Nancy, you know, it's not the Nancy you're thinking of. It's the other one, the Chinese one. I used to tell her, you know, I don't understand. You know, I read the Tao Te Ching and I think, oh, now here's wisdom. You know, all this Western crap, you know, it just leads you into a dead end, you know. But I read the Tao Te Ching and it liberates me. And she's like, let me tell you about the Taoist church, you know, the Taoist temple that my father is the head of in Chinatown. And she'll tell me some stories, you know, about a little bit of ego going on, about a little bit of backstabbing going on, about a little bit of palm greasing going on, about a lot of stuff that's familiar from Western churches. And so it's human, you know,
It's like I was saying, everybody has a true self and a false self.
Yeah.
Every church, every organization has that.
Now, true self and false self, I like that. I would say true self equals what had previously in Victorian times been called higher self. And false self equals what had previously been called by Freud alone, ego. And, you know, but I like true self and false self.
Those are the terms that Thomas Keating uses.
Well, I like Thomas Keating. My dad liked Thomas Keating. In the interview in 1990, I just listened to it again, and he kept interrupting you. And you had just introduced him to Thomas Keating in 1990, so it's pretty cool.
Well, I came to the Tree of Life by the opposite route of you.
Right.
Because when I was around 20 or so, I had a spiritual awakening through an LSD experience, and I became totally interested in Eastern religion and Eastern philosophy.
Yeah.
And I just felt that this whole Western thing is not for me.
Ooh.
And I spent the next 20 some odd years.
So you're trying to save people 20 years by letting them know that there's something cool in the West. You don't have to go to the East. You can find it in your own culture and save people some time. So you're doing the same thing I'm doing. I'm trying to save them time by saying, skip the West. You don't have to go there either. You know, so that's interesting. I just noticed that.
Yeah.
We're both coming from the same point of trying to help others to not get lost like we did.
Well, we learned
a little bit. We
learn through our experiences,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Particularly through our mistakes and our failures, we have an opportunity to learn from them. Hopefully we do learn from them.
Yeah.
But my approach to the Tree of Life kind of presupposes and is grounded in my background in the Eastern stuff, which you are now finding, at least in theory, you're finding it very delightful.
Yeah.
Even though when you look at the human organizations,
Well, of course, yeah.
you see that they're still tainted by the mixtures of the true and false
It's
self.
easier to see the ideas and the abstraction without those associations, and that's where a lot of people, you know, with Christianity, people can't hear the wisdom of, oh, well, you were born into sin, and through faith you can achieve salvation. Like most people who have any kind of Christian background are like, stop talking to me right now, like, ew, you know. And I'm coming from a standpoint of like, well, the higher self will give you a hand and help you traverse the path of darkness into the light. And I'm like, ew, fuck off with that shit, you know, like no, you're not my higher self, you're a creepy old man in a suit, you know. So I mean, it's that, you know, and maybe someone in a Buddhist standpoint comes from maybe a similar, someone soured their the taste of Buddhism for
well, the human condition has its limitations.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice for it to look and attractive to look at the ideals, but when it comes down to the reality of the human condition, there's always these little imperfections, flaws, and shortcomings that pop up.
Yeah.
But I think most people's intentions are good. You know?
Yeah.
But why aren't they able to totally live those? It's because they're carrying the baggage of negative programming of the false self system that undermines and undercuts. Like Thomas Keating talks about people having mixed motivations.
Yeah.
Like you're doing it consciously, you think you're doing something for all the right reasons and for the higher ideals.
Right under the surface.
But underneath there's a hidden agenda where you're doing it for your false self.
Yeah.
So that you can get power and control or affection, esteem,
and that's
approval,
where there's some wisdom in the
forth.
story of Job in an abstract sense, because something has to come along and test that. I'm thinking of a particular example where there was a man who was a cult leader who, you know, it seemed to all appearances to someone who wasn't looking too closely. Like, it was all very good, you know, and but then when times became tough, you got to see the really ugly side of that person, because they were like, okay, so now that times are tough for me, who's gonna let me crash at their place, huh? BT, you gonna let me crash at in your mansion, you know? And I was like, kind of conditioned over the course of years to feel guilty about having so much, and I was in charge of the charity outings and stuff like that. And so I said, okay, you can move in with me, and that was when the whole order kind of came together to come to my rescue, and that was kind of the force that really ended up causing everybody to be liberated from that guy. Was they didn't want to see that happen. So, you know, but I was right there in the thick of it. But yeah, you know, you find out how ugly someone is. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we all have our ugly side and our pretty side.
Yeah.
And that's just human nature. It's not our fault, it's just our inheritance. Or maybe it's the price we have to pay for human incarnation, is being in the tussle between these
like
forces inside of us.
That old question, like, I mean, I have this, but if I had nothing, would I be a thief? Would I be a criminal? You know, if someone handed me a gun, would I say, stick them up, give me your wallet? You know?
What do you need and what do you want? I mean, those are the two variables.
Yeah.
What we need are wants that we don't have a choice about.
Yeah.
The other things we want are wants that we do have a choice about, if we don't really need them, that is.
Yeah.
But if we think we need them, and we don't really need them, you know, then we're trapped. We're in a trap.
Yeah.
We become a slave to those needs that aren't really needs.
I remember my dad would always say, you don't have to, you get to. If you have to, you're enslaving yourself with your words. If you get to, then it's exciting that it's something you get to do. And I was listening to my own recording the other day, and I was talking about how transcending, you know, life on Earth, you can kind of see how our spines aren't quite used to standing up straight yet. We're trying. We've been you know, off of all fours for a while, but we still got a ways to go. And you can see it not only in that, in our lower spine issues that we all get if we live long enough, but in the way we behave, in the way that civilization is. That, I mean, and it's kind of like, it's almost, I mean, when you think about it too much, sometimes from a certain point of view, it's depressing, because it's going to be a while. I mean, you know, people like to think, oh, maybe in our lifetime, maybe the technology will save us. I don't know. I think it's going to be a few more tens of thousands of years, actually, before we get to look like anything that we would call, okay, now humanity's cool. You know, like it's a long way off.
It's a growing up process.
Yeah.
All of our fighting is childish behavior.
Yeah.
And we're still in emotional kindergarten to a high degree.
Yeah.
As a species. And we don't know the way to our better self yet.
I feel like people probably had this conversation in ancient Alexandria and someone wrote it down for posterity, and then fucking Genghis Khan came and burned it down, you know, and I'm hoping, you know, I mean, just as insofar as I try to detach from my motive to help humanity, but insofar as I have a motive to help humanity, I hope that the internet lasts so that this and other conversations toward humanity's evolution can remain in the collective pool of knowledge.
Yeah.
You know? Like, if everybody back then had access... I mean, because when I look at... I forget her name. I wish I remembered her name, because she's a really important historical figure, and everybody should... And I'm going to go back and edit it later and say her name is... Hypatia of Alexandria. That's Hypatia. Born somewhere between 350 and 370 Common Era, died in 415. And she was the librarian at Alexandria, and she had said, you know, something very lucid about how fables should never be taught as history or fact. That you can't. It creates a way for people to control armies, and you can't unbrainwash them because you can't. You know, and she was just like, she was being really clear. And yeah. I mean, if Alexandria at that moment in history had, you know, a website, had, you know, a way for people to like access it from everywhere in the world, then surely, yeah, the Genghis Khan and the boys would probably still be chopping off heads like ISIS or whatever, but they'd still be looking. They'd still hear it, you know, like eventually, I think it would have had a positive effect, you know. I mean, I think that part of it is our collective culture, our collective agreements, our collective religion, if you will. And, you know, and then that becomes a question of, does religion help? I mean, anymore, you know, or is it just hurting? You know, there's some aspects of it that help, you know.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's not all black and white, one or the other, but it's a mix.
Yeah. It's
doing both of those things.
A lot of people will, you know, put everything, you know, like you know, the mall. It's like people will say the mall is evil, right? I mean,
the mall ain't evil.
The mall, yeah, it's a consumerism church. And it's the one everybody goes to.
Well, if you think that's God, then, you know, you're in the dark, and the results for you will be evil, but it's not the mall's fault.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, from a cynical point of view, at least, you know, you go into a church and you give them some money and you get a bunch of hot air. You go into a mall, you give them some money, at least you walk out with something. You know,
something you can use.
Yeah.
Or play with.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to show you some of this stuff that I brought.
Cool.
That you might find of interest. First is this. They did a feature on me on my prison ministry.
Oh, nice. Freedom Awakens. Kess brings hope behind prison walls.
Yeah.
This is the Christmas 2015 issue of Alaska Catholic. And Archdiocese of Anchorage.com. Diocese of Fairbanks.org. Cool.
Yeah. So they did a little...
Out of the corner of my eye, you look a little bit like David Bowie in this picture. I don't know. Like, when I was reading this, I was like, oh, wait, that's you.
That's me. Taken right on my porch there last November.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Catholicism. I appreciate the whole system. You know, the only thing is it's so incompatible with other things that don't look enough like it. I mean... You know, as far as when you get down to brass tacks, like I tried to join, and I think what happened was the guy who brought me in, like he thinks that he's in a role of priest and parishioner with me now, and so he can't relate to me as anything but a sheep that has gone astray, and I'm trying to relate as a human being who is a fellow, you know, worker toward an ecumenical network. And I'm I've been testing his limits for years and years and years. Like, he would raise money to help the Greek Orthodox campground that got there was a landslide. And so I'd say, can we raise money to help the Gnostic church down in Hollywood that burned down last week? And he would just ignore me, And so I've been like that for years, how can we extend the boundaries of what you consider acceptable a little further? But he has people he reports to is the problem, and he can't go outside.
He has to follow their orders.
Yeah.
Well, these are a couple of flyers.
Honestly, I don't think he's checking with them. I think he's just sort of ignoring me, and I think it's sort of fear motivated, and I think he's listening right now, so that's why I'm saying this. But anyway.
These are flyers. This is the talk I gave last year, and then underneath it's the one I was involved in just recently in Dallas.
Centering Prayer and World Transformation.
Yeah.
Cool. It has one of these Jerusalem labyrinths where the people who couldn't afford to make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, or who were too handicapped or too old, would crawl around the labyrinth, and when they found the middle, then that would be their Jerusalem.
All right.
It's the origin of that anyway. This one in Texas, I'm sure nobody's actually used it for that
It's
purpose.
pretty big. It's a big labyrinth.
Maybe they have. Well, they call it something else now. I'm sure they're like, this is where you find your relationship with. It's the
finding it's a way to your center. It's a
Yeah.
path to your center.
That reminds me. Gordon was on his way. One of my mentors was on his way to Jerusalem, and he got sidetracked in Tangiers, and then he ended up running a drug ring in Paris and Spain. But I mean, it seems like all good stories start with a pilgrimage to Jerusalem that goes awry. Christian Rosenkreuz, him and Frater Pal left Germany to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and his mentor died, and he got sidetracked, and he was in Syria. Then he went to Fez, and he went all the way across, and he never did make it to Jerusalem, and neither did Gordon. It's just funny how the pilgrimage to Jerusalem is such a good device for a journey.
And so, this is the more recent one I just did, along with Bill Sheehan. It's a really nice
Dimensions of the Human Condition. In 2001, I was going to, my whole plan was, and I had the papers and everything, I was going to move to Israel, and I was going to move to Jerusalem and build a Golden Dawn temple there.
Gosh.
I know, it was insane.
Yeah, well, they've made they videoed both of these things. And
Nice.
There's a DVD of the first one, and I'm sure there will be the second one. Then this is something I've been working on in response to some criticisms against centering prayer from a fundamentalist Catholic woman down in San Diego.
So you're getting it from both sides. I'm over here.
That's right.
On one, and they're over there.
It's from both sides.
That we made. I can totally relate with that, by the way. I mean, being not only traditional Golden Dawn, but in the one traditional Golden Dawn order that professed to be the most Christian one. It was, it's like, what Christian is gonna look at me seriously when I say, oh, well, I'm the most Christian kind of occultist? And what occultist is going to take me seriously when I say that, And so it's a very, very narrow niche to try to be in. But anyway.
Yeah, I've been in consultation with Thomas Keating.
This is the same stuff that Johannes Trithemius was going through when the Catholic Church was accusing him of black magic when he was teaching what he called the magic of Christ, the magic of the love of Christ. To Henry Agrippa, and then Henry Agrippa was turning around and writing those books, the 4 treatises on occult philosophy, and he was also teaching Paracelsus and Robert Flood and a few other people. He's a very interesting character.
Yeah. Well,
so what were they complaining about?
Well, that it's totally against the Catholic Church, and that it's non-Christian, that it's New Age. That Thomas Keating is teaching the Hindu concept of Atman as Brahman and Brahman as Atman. That Thomas Keating denies the existence of hell, eternal punishment.
You're going through
for
what
everybody.
Alan Watts was going through with the Episcopals in the 1950s. You're going through exactly that. Have you read all of his books from that period?
No.
I highly recommend. There's something about the spirit. He was talking about how if the Christian church were to actually be what it says it is, it would be the most enraptured party, and it would be the most Dionysian experience you could possibly... I mean, the fact that you're all coming together as a community, and that community is the bride of God, and God is coming down, and you're gonna make love, you know, like it's so good. Why do you have to spoil it? And you know, like, and then, but he was talking about his experience of when being taken aside as an 11-year-old and being told that if he masturbates, he's gonna go to hell. You know, like it's so the opposite. It's like what we were talking about before of like these quote unquote evil forces coming in and trying to co-opt something that's very useful and good. Oh, and in my dad's interview, he had defined evil using the definition from Scott Peck, People of the Lie, that it's to do harm or to take away life or aliveness from another without a need for sustenance. You know, I mean, like he was kind of making an exception for when you need to eat, you know, like or like just the natural life-taking that we do on a daily basis. But when you go out, like hunting for sport, basically, you know, intentionally hurting or
being
harming.
cruel and malicious,
not
as an end in itself, not as a means to something that you really need.
Now that's where S&M gets to be kind of interesting and weird. I mean, you can kind of see it as a psychological band-aid for if someone is operating in a society where there's all kinds of sadomasochism already, and then you want to go in and have I mean, I know you're not involved in sadomasochism already, but there's an episode, if you dial back a few episodes there, so we had a whole conversation. I had the guy that is in charge of a lot of S&M community talking about, he's a good friend of mine, but anyway, what was I talking about? Anyway, yeah. Cool.
Another thing that
we may be one. This is the response to.
Well, this is a response for people who practice and teach centering prayer.
Yeah.
What I'm working on now will be like a more public response.
Oh, cool.
For the general public.
Yeah. I think that there's plenty of material to draw from there, but of course, he would be another, like Thomas Keating, person that if you quote, they'll just say, oh, well, he's just quoting that guy who ended up becoming a bohemian Buddhist drug addict, alcoholic, you know, like, you know, they don't... I love Alan Watts, but it's hard to get through to these people that insist that it has to be old-time religion, you know?
Well, yeah, they're pretty closed off.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's much hope of reaching them.
But maybe their kids or their parishioners we can get through. I mean, they probably, the ones that are already fed up, you know, the dissenters.
Well, one of the things also that you mentioned non-duality earlier, that this critic condemns Thomas Keating
for using the
centering
phrase
prayer for. Well, she says that non-duality is completely contrary to the Catechism of the Catholic Church,
which is Zoroastrian,
and the practice of Christianity.
Right.
So, I'm having to do some writing about what is non-duality, because it's become a very much used term, kind of a fashionable term. I like what you said. It's not one and it's not two.
Well, Suzuki put it well. He was talking about sitting in lotus position, how your legs become not one and not two. That your left is on the right and your right is on the left, and like, you know, that kind of thing. But he was talking about that as when you get into meditation, it's not just your legs that are like that. It's your mind and body. It's you and the world. It's past, present, and future. It's, you know, it's all non-dual. It's not two and it's not one. It's
well, her misinterpretation of non-duality is monistic, meaning, well, I guess
it's one.
that it's a kind of a one. There was a horror movie that came out when I was a kid called The Blob. Did you ever hear that?
Yeah. I think I subconsciously used part of that in some of my poetry.
Yeah, the blob was like this big thing, like a big piece of jelly.
Yeah.
And it was absorbing everyone and everything into itself. Basically, it was going to eat the world if they couldn't stop it. So that's kind of her idea of non-duality. It's like this amorphous one that destroys the uniqueness and individuality of everything and just absorbs everything into it. It's a featureless unity, which is the opposite of duality, but it's a dualistic interpretation of non-duality, totally inaccurate.
Yeah. I had an experience one time that I used the phrase, the gooey bubble of graven images, but it's like the blob. But my dad had, in Transformations, talked about stereotypes, and then said some call them graven images. And, what was the it was the from the silence a word came, but it was all words, and it destroyed the gooey bubble of graven images. But ultimately, the gooey bubble of graven images was made up of ancient words. Was made up of words that that all came from that same source.
It once had life.
Yeah, but they are all kind of. And I called it muttering and complaining about itself.
That's a very nice phrase, gooey bubble of graven images.
Yeah, like an urban environment with a lot of chewing gum under your shoe, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, well, also there was that experience, of initiation that I wrote about. I brought a few of my books here, the Human Ground, Spiritual Ground.
Oh yeah.
The One Who Loves Us. The first chapter on that is called What is Spirituality? Because you were wondering about, the spirituality, you were saying it's become somewhat a meaningless term.
Well, I mean, I still maintain that, you could get into the meaning of the word spirit, the older meaning of the word spirit, the meaning of spirit in different ancient languages, but then the way that what people mean when they say spirituality now is that they kneel down in front of a little crystal pyramid instead of going to church. And I don't think that that's a very good definition. I think that the old definition, breath or life energy, is good, but when people tense their perineum and their hair stands up on end, that's spirit. That's what we're talking about, and that's the force that moves through the universe. That's the hidden fire that echoes through the depths of the universe, and it's God, it's you, and it's also nature, and there's nothing separating it from nature. And I think when Christianity and Judeo-Christianity comes along and insists that it's something separate from nature, then I get offended, because they're talking about me. They're talking about my wife, they're talking about my earth, they're talking about my house, and then they're putting it all in some kind of porno magazine, and even that is sacred, and then calling all of that profane, and then saying this other thing over here called spirit is sacred, and I think that that's all just a sham.
Well, that's dualistic.
That's dualism. Yeah, again,
division. It's dividing. Dividing things. And
so spirituality, then it's like, well, where's the uality come in, or the ality, or the itty? As opposed to what? I mean, as opposed to non-spirit. I mean, what's the opposite of spirituality? Consumerism? Then, well, I thought being a producer is the opposite of consumer. It's like, well, what is it? Where is it? Is going to Target and buying something made of plastic with a credit card, is that spiritual? I think so. It's just in disguise.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different ideas people have of it.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I wrote that chapter, because I felt it's a term that needed to be honored and clarified.
Yeah.
And one of the parts of that is this idea of the spectrum of micro-spirituality, and then the macro-spirituality of non-created reality being the original ultimate spirituality, which we could refer to as divine love, or, again, true love, truth, and freedom, something that is really transcending creation, but yet embracing and including it.
Maybe a B-flat microwave radiation behind everything?
Maybe, I want to see if I can find this diagram. Yeah, here it is. This is in the newer book, The Will of Divine Love, which is kind of a continuation of the prior book. But there's this diagram I came up with. I guess we can't show it. Oh, I think I went past it. Yeah, here it is. Before I show you that, though, a couple other aspects of spirituality one definition of spirituality has to do with how attuned we are with that macro spirituality and to what degree that macro spirituality expresses through us as human beings.
Yeah.
That's another concept which is related to the micro spirituality spectrum, has to do with the spirit in which we act. That has to do with our inner attitude, what's motivating us. So there are many different spirits in which we can act.
Yeah.
With the essential emotion that is motivating us.
Yeah.
So there you've got the spectrum.
Right.
It could be any emotion. So they're all different forms of spirituality, going from the dark to the light side of the spectrum. So here's the diagram. Well, maybe I should try to move closer to you so we can look at it at the same time. But glad that you can edit this. I'm glad you can edit whatever's being recorded, but this is the diagram. So we can start out here where you've got the all-embracing, non-dual macro spirituality of the divine consciousness, and that it includes everything else. Mm-hmm. And then from that, in this upper triad, you have the will of divine love, and then the laws of cosmic justice, and then coming down here you have the individual souls with free will choices based upon our attractions to the principles of good or evil. And then underneath this you have the micro spirituality spectrum, which goes from dark to light. And in the middle you've got all the mixed motivations, which is where most of us are most of the time.
Right.
In other words, we're not purely dark or purely in the light. But out of the dark side, it's what's called the root of false perspective, which is the attraction to the negativity of evil and self-destruction. And then under the light side, the root of true perspective, which is our attraction to good. And the idea of the roots of perspective, the root of false perspective is what gives rise to all the delusions and illusions that we have, all our ignorances and misunderstandings. And when we take those to be true representations of reality, we act blindly and basically create misery for ourselves. And then the root of true perspective sees things as it is according to the truth of reality. So it sees both the dark and the light sides and the middle part of the spectrum, but sees them as they actually are objectively. It's not, in other words, it's not delusional. And then between these, we have the conflict and drama of human life, where we're caught up in choosing between these and acting. And then there's like these three walls. This is another part of the meditation thing, where you have like the wall of thoughts, which is the most superficial wall.
Yeah.
The wall of thoughts includes all the appearances that we perceive around us and inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
Underlying the wall of thoughts is the wall of energy. So the thoughts arise out of the energy, and they take, all the different forms. So that would be like your level of the prana or the rauch, or the noima, the basic primal energy. And then underneath that is the wall of silence, which should also correlate to doth the cloud on the tree, or the state of non-conceptual contemplative prayer that centering prayer is kind of an entry into. So this deeper silence that transcends thoughts and energy, and it's just sheer non-dual spaciousness and silence.
Mm-hmm.
And then underneath that, we come into the non-dual consciousness of the individual soul in its true center, which links directly to the all-embracing macro-spirituality of the divine consciousness. So through this, the divine consciousness manifests into us and into created reality through us.
It makes me think of precipitation, the water cycle, that a drop of water, becomes a cloud and then rains back down, and then that's what happens when it hits the water, is when the, what's written at the bottom?
The non-dual consciousness in the individual soul's true center. And then underneath
and then
it says
that connects right back to the all-encompassing non-dual.
This is a diagram of spiritual psychology and God's great adventure.
Right.
And that's all predicated upon things that are earlier in the book.
But the point where the non-dual consciousness in individual soul's true center hits the all-embracing non-dual macro spirituality.
They're the same.
Is where that's right, where the drop of water hits the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's revealed that the drop of water is the ocean, which, since we're talking about oceans and water, we're basically ocean bags. We've got, and not
ocean bags,
complete with 4 trillion different kinds of species of critters living in us that are each operating autonomously and have their own separate DNA, and they all have a community that they, and every decision we make, when I decide to sit here and drink coffee and screw up my body instead of taking vitamin C and making lunch, for instance, that decision's affecting this entire ocean of activity, and then it complains back at me, and I go, fucking body, But I mean, that's all spiritual, isn't it? I mean, that's Neil deGrasse Tyson's spirituality. That's
ultimately everything
is where the cosmos is the ocean. The ocean's just a smaller microcosm of the cosmos that we can almost wrap our mind around, but we can't even wrap our mind around the ocean because it's so huge. How much less can we wrap our mind around the cosmos,
Well, one of my favorite notions of what we nowadays call non-duality came from an article written by my teacher Lama Govinda. Well, this was written.
Now, was that Brad Pitt in 7 Years in Tibet?
Well, it was.
Basically, that's who he was portraying.
He wasn't portraying Lama Govinda.
No. But that was basically the same story.
He was portraying
but it wasn't
an Austrian mountain climber.
Okay.
Who went to compete in the Olympics? World War II
I guess I haven't seen the movie. What? So Lama Govinda.
Lama Govinda was German.
And he went to Tibet back in the day.
Yeah, back in the 40s. Well, that's what I just wanted to mention. That
sorry.
I got this idea.
He would have met Brad Pitt. Never mind.
He might have known the person that Brad Pitt portrays in that movie, 7 Years in Tibet.
Yeah.
Heinrich Heimler or something was his name. But
okay.
That is very much an aside. Sorry. I want to credit Lama Govinda with this idea. The reason I'm mentioning him was an article. I was part of his Arya Maitreya Mandala organization, and he was the leader of it.
Okay.
And we got these newsletters every month, and there was this one called The Significance of Meditation in Buddhism. And in it, he was saying, well, often we're captured by crude similes, like the idea that the drop slips into the tiny ocean. Whereas it would be more accurate to say that the ocean slips into the shining drop. In other words, we attract the entire cosmos into our microcosmic soul.
Yeah.
And we become one with it.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this is intended to suggest.
Right.
And that's the non-duality that doesn't destroy our individuality and our uniqueness.
Yeah.
But it doesn't limit us to that either. It includes us to everything.
Yeah.
So it's both.
I love that because to me that is devoid of anything that resembles fear of ceasing to exist and desire to live forever. It's the simple acknowledgement that which is going on right now is us, and isn't that wild?
Yes.
And that's it. There's no why. It's just that's it. That's it.
That's
I mean, because as soon as you
said.
say why, and then someone says to learn lessons, then I'm thinking of fucking school, you know, and then it's depressing, and then I'm slitting my wrists, you know. So I mean, you know, if we just stick with, that's why I like the Tao, you know, because it's like he who speaks does not know, he who knows does not speak, and then I just close the book right there, you know, and say, oh well, I should stop listening to you.
I want to share something with you.
Okay.
I went to a talk by Alan Watts.
Mm-hmm. On his houseboat?
No, it wasn't on. I did go on his houseboat to see Lama Govinda, and he was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I had kind of an encounter with him. But he was talking about Lama Govinda.
Mm.
I think it was him. Or either it was Lama Govinda was talking about Alan Watts. But this is what was happening. See, Alan Watts had Lama Govinda as a guest on his houseboat. He welcomed him and his wife to the West and gave him a place to stay when they visited here. So they were tight buddies.
Right.
And Lama Govinda was fluent in 7 languages.
Wow.
English being one of them, German. He was born as a German.
My grandpa was one of those. But, yeah.
So anyway, they were having a conversation, and Alan Watts posed a question to Lama Govinda. He said, if you could change the world in any way that you wanted it to be changed, if you were like, you know, God, and you had carte blanche, and you could, you know, there's problems in the world and all that, you could fix it all, you could change the world into anything you wanted it to be, what would you do? And Lama Govinda said, nothing. I'd leave it just the way it is.
And then people say, wouldn't you kill Hitler? Wouldn't you stop the pain and suffering? Wouldn't you make so people aren't? That's
oh,
weird.
yeah, there's
and
all
then they
kinds
get
of things.
accused of being cold-hearted.
Yeah.
Like in the Bhagavad Gita, it says that the truly wise does not mourn because he looks around and he sees Krishna in everybody's heart, and Krishna's on his journey. And, you know, sometimes he's suffering, sometimes he's not. And you don't let it bother you. You know?
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, Mother Teresa looked around and saw Jesus everywhere. And he was suffering. So she was like, do you need some water? And then she spent the rest of her life doing that. So if there's a right and wrong, and that's a duality, which one's right? You know? Of course, the people that have tuned in because they saw your name on the bill will say, well, Mother Teresa was right.
Well, she was
obvious reasons. For nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we all know who the good guys are reasons.
Well, she was being true to her heart.
She was.
And her calling.
And the author of the Bhagavad Gita was writing 5,000 years earlier, for one thing. Or however many thousand years earlier.
Yeah.
He hadn't seen what happens when you establish Pakistan and millions of people end up in Calcutta. The author of the Bhagavad Gita could not have predicted what Mother Teresa was seeing with her eyes.
And something about Mother Teresa that's very interesting that not all people, or not many really, are aware of. Well, I can tell you 2 things. But one is that, and this is written in her biography, Be Thou My Light. When she was a young nun, and she was first in India, she was having these ecstatic experiences of Christ and his love. And not unlike the things that Teresa of Avila experienced. And at one point, she asked Jesus, she made a request to Jesus. And she, you know, it's to the effect that, well, I know how wonderful you are, I know what your love is, I'm so full and, you know, satisfied, this is heaven, but I want to be one with you in your suffering on the cross. Let me be in solidarity with you in your darkest hour. I want to experience what you experienced. She asked for that. And then it was given to her. And she spent the rest of her life feeling alienated and cut off from God. And the only time that she felt close to Christ was when she saw Christ in the suffering people she was ministering to. But yet, while she was in that state, people around her felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. They felt grace around her. There's a man that I know named David Furnett, who's part of the Centering Prayer movement, and he was invited to go to a visitation with her when she went to the United Nations when she was in New York City. I think it was sometime in the early 90s. And there was this small, audience of people that she spoke to, and then they got to go up and kind of shake her hand or get her darshan, her blessing. And he said the whole time he just felt all this peace and love radiating from her. But according to what was written in this book, while she was feeling separate and alienated from Christ, people around her were feeling the grace.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a real split between what was going on in her inner consciousness and the energy
the effect it was having.
that people felt on her.
That's interesting.
But the reason I told him after he had shared this that was what she had asked for. That's why she was experiencing it that way. Because she told the people that she didn't feel she was in Christ's presence. She felt completely separated from God. But then when she was helping people, then in them that was the only time she felt it. So you can see how motivated, out of not only of compassion she was.
In the Golden Dawn Eucharist, well, I found it in the Requiem. It makes a lot of sense in the Requiem, but it's very interesting. It's just basically the definition of the soul in the Golden Dawn is Osiris, the resurrected one. And Osiris has basically 5 parts. One is this undefinable spirit, which, I debate about whether or not we're actually talking about something, or if there's even anything to debate about. But really it's these 4 elements. And the 4 elements are, starts with the red rose, which refers to the sigh of Osiris's suffering. And very overtly refers to the rose cross,
the
red rose
on the rose of the cross,
which of course the cross of suffering.
And
the 4 elements make a cross. So it's like, Osiris. Right.
So this was before the time of Jesus, obviously, in ancient Egypt.
No, this is Golden Dawn.
Well,
this is very retroactive.
Well, this wasn't part of the Egyptian tradition, actually.
No, this is Rosicrucians making a new revised version of Rosicrucianism based on what Budge was translating from the new excavations and based on personal communion with what they were digging up at the time.
Egyptian Book of the Dead.
And grafting it onto the system they already had. And then there was this chicken scratch called the cipher manuscripts, and that was actually written in a certain cipher that they used a book of Johannes Trithemius, who I made reference to earlier as Henry Agrippa's teacher, called the Polygraphia, to translate. So either it was written by Johannes Trithemius, someone in his lineage, or by someone who knew the script and insisted upon writing it in it so that someone would have to use the Polygraphia to translate it back into Roman letters and figure out what the hell it was saying. One of those 3 options. And that's the entire script of the Neophyte of the Golden Dawn, the entire script of the Zelator, Theoricus, Practicus, and Philosophus grades of the Golden Dawn. The entire order was based on these notes. No one knows who wrote the notes. And so that's kind of the mystery element of Golden Dawn.
Wow.
To this day, it's still mysterious. It was Fräulein Sprengel, whoever that is. It sounds like this name is made up. Who passed it along. But, people speculate it was made up by Westcott, or say there's all kinds of speculation. People debate about it, But So, I mean, it helps to have an element of mystery in your mystery school. I mean, everybody's knocking Hubbard because it's just some idiot that was making up sci-fi. But if you had an element of mystery to it, if he had like, well, I got this all from somewhere, then they'd be able to say, well, no, he got it from somewhere, you know. But they don't even bother to say that. They just say, well, this is what L. Ron Hubbard said. Anyway, what was I talking about? Shit, I got too far afield.
Well, before you started talking, I had just finished talking about Mother Teresa and,
right,
and you know the duality.
Yeah, the suffering.
Of her
Okay. So suffering. So in the Golden Dawn, you're dressed in red, and you say, "Everybody, commune with me with the sacred element of air, which is the suffering of the smell of a rose." And you know it has thorns, and everybody's thinking of the crucifixion. So you know it's very compatible with Christianity. The other three are the red lamp, which means the will of the divine, the fire which flashes through the hidden depths of the universe. I was making reference to earlier as being what they call spirit, but in that case it'd be fire instead of air. But sometimes it goes back and forth because air catches on fire, you know. So, but then
fire needs oxygen.
Yeah. And then the other two are the familiar ones: the red wine for the blood pouring forth from my heart, sacrificed unto regeneration and unto the newer life. Again, everybody's thinking of the crucifixion. And then the bread, which is the symbol of sacred earth, which I destroy in order that it may be renewed, and everybody's thinking of the crucifixion. So they've got the four elements of paganism co-opted into Christianity right at the very beginning of the Golden Dawn system, but in the name of being Egyptian. But then you find out in the end, ta-da! Just kidding, it was all Christianity. And so. What was my point? So yeah, that's very much in line with Mother Teresa. So this, you know, I would like to identify with the suffering of God, is what the Hierophant says when he
to be close to him on the cross.
When he deigns to say, "This is my suffering, and I'm representing God." And Mother Teresa said, "I want to identify with that suffering. I've fucking been there too. I've totally been there. I've cut myself 5 times." In all the Jesus wound spots and gone through the 14 stations daily. I've done all that. So, you know, I've gone up to Mater Della Rosa and very solemnly gone up to all those statues and all of that. And then I kind of like moved on. And so I no longer think that is the penultimate appropriate way to identify with God. Ta-da! I think there's wisdom in being able to confront LVX, life, death, resurrection. Okay, so the universe, you know, it's probably going to fizzle out one day, but out of its ashes, another big bang will come, and then people will be having the same conversation we're having right now, but they'll be green and have eyes in different places. And great. And then that'll fizzle out. So it's happening now, and it's happening on a grand scale. It's happening on, you know, my cat's gonna die. That'll be sad. I love Janie. One of us is gonna die on the other. We don't know who it's gonna be. One of us is gonna be here all alone, going, "Oh, I'm sad."
Most likely, yeah.
God willing, we should, you know.
You could go together.
Last
You
that
never
long.
know.
Well, I mean, you know, yeah. Well, we'll see.
Anything's possible.
Yeah, but I mean LVX, right? That's what it is. That's the ability to confront and get beyond fear of death. And in the Golden Dawn, they train you in a certain way to deal with fear of death. They start you out. The first thing you see, you take off the hoodwink, and someone's there with a sword saying, "Fear is failure," and you're like, "Oh shit!" And then at the very end, someone's in a red robe saying, "I am God, but I'm actually Osiris. It's an Egyptian thing. Smell my suffering." And so that's what you get kind of indoctrinated into as your personification of God. But I like other personifications of God, like Krishna, you know, or Shiva, you know, or you know, David Bowie. I'm really into David Bowie, you know, or myself, or Crowley, whatever. It's all starting to look the same to me. The Baphomet symbol works. You know, it's all it's all one, you know. And there's people who are separatists. Some of them wear black hoods. Some of them wear white hoods, and. Well, you know, you gotta love them too, I guess. You know, all parts of the body don't have the same function.
Everybody is acting out their own drama in their own way, and a lot of it is simply therapy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's group therapy.
When you were talking about these friends of yours that are Satanists and S&M, I imagine that what they're doing is that they're acting out something that is going to help them to heal.
Yeah,
They need to externalize it and form a relationship with it so they can accept that part of themselves.
Yeah.
We all have that in us.
Yeah. It's like a Jungian thing, and they know Jung, if nothing else. They know the shadow. So it's very much about, okay, this is the shadow. I love you, shadow. And
integrate it.
Yeah.
Self-acceptance.
Totally.
Yes. Well, the imagery that you are describing in these Golden Dawn ceremonies or initiations, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's poetry.
Yeah. But you can still see the limitations of it.
And there's a lot of melodrama built into it.
Yeah.
And it's an external
you can see what happened
thing
to
that's
Crowley,
acted
Paul
out.
Case, and Yeats.
And it must have an effect internally on the
psychologically,
on the unconscious.
Yeah.
Now, I guess if it's done in the right way,
watching The Matrix,
it will produce
does something similar.
produce.
Everybody who's seen The Matrix can relate to each other as people who've seen The Matrix. And same thing with Golden Dawn initiates. You know, as we've all been there. We've all stood between the pillars while someone told us the secret handshakes, thinking about the guy that yelled at us and thinking about the guy that seemed to be the sun, reconciling everything, and how it's all about not going too far towards severity, not going too far to mercy, and how cool the aesthetic is of red socks on black and white tile. Like, we've all had that experience. It's a very specific experience to have all. So you meet a stranger and you find out, oh, you're traditional Golden Dawn? What a fucking trip, right? You know, but it doesn't mean that it's the truth. You know, I'd say far from it. I'd say it's just as far from it as Queen Victoria. You know, but it's a good cure for Christianity.
It's a rite of passage, definitely.
Yeah.
A pretty dramatic one. I mean, particularly when you get down to cutting yourself and all that stuff.
Well, not everybody does that. That was something that was added by our Voldemort character. That wasn't traditional. Yeah, he was bringing in more ancient, more traditional elements. You know,
more outer drama.
Yeah.
But if it changes what's inside, then it's going to have a therapeutic, spiritually nourishing effect. Yeah. But if it doesn't, then it's just superficial drama.
Yeah,
well, that's going to depend on the heart of the practitioner.
It can take over your life, you know. Like it's I don't know. Yeah, it has an effect, but I mean, when people use the word spiritual, I think watching The Matrix to me is more spiritual, you know, than going through all that. But I think all of that is the Victorian equivalent of watching The Matrix, is to go through the entire Golden Dawn system up to 5 = 6. But these days, thank God, people could just watch The Matrix.
Much easier.
Yeah.
Quicker, too.
Yeah. And then do their derivative sci-fi, you know. That's where things are at now. I like to have... I'm done looking at where things used to be, you know. But should we wrap up? Do you have any final words? Do you have any interesting random memory of my dad that you haven't told me about yet?
Random memory of your dad?
Yeah.
Well, he was... probably nothing I haven't already told you, but he was a very, very intense person.
Yeah.
Very alive and very engaged. And he didn't suffer fools easily.
Yeah. I know. I've been doing the horrible disservice of doing my best to channel him tonight. I say tonight because I assume people are listening at night, but of course it's morning for us. So
or afternoon. It's about 1:20. Well, maybe next time we could, if we do this again.
Oh yeah, no, I want to do this as many times as we can.
We could talk about that experience I had, which was in the last chapter.
Do you have time?
In the last chapter of this book and in the Model of Love.
Yeah, that was the psychedelic experience itself.
Well, it wasn't a psychedelically induced experience.
Okay.
But
was it a flashback?
No, it wasn't that either. It was very transforming experience.
Oh, I mean, I've had some really transformative psychedelic experiences. To me, the only real, I mean, I'm a little bit in agreement with one thing Terence McKenna said, that he was saying he's tried Buddhism, he's tried voodoo, he tried this, he tried that, he tried Christianity, he tried mysticism, he tried this, and then finally he tried psilocybin in a darkened room, and that was it. That was what gave him his religious experience, that he was able to find his true self and waken out of the great sleep, and I'm like, yeah, isn't that true? I mean, I had my acid experience in Philosophist that helped a lot, and then I had more recent DMT experiences that helped me get back to what's really important and get my head out of all that sewery mirror refraction. It's like, there's mirrors and then there's shattered mirrors, and when you're still, it's like when your mirror is shattered. I mean, in this example, I'm talking about like a church being a mirror. It does its best to be an image of, but then when it gets shattered and it's still going, and it's going while it's shattered, it's just like a living embodiment of everything it shouldn't be, But at the same time, it's really, really, really obviously not what it purports to be, so you couldn't possibly fall for the trick. And so you can kind of say, well, in some ways I prefer this to a really perfect order. Because wouldn't that suck if there was someone at the head that everybody believed was truly the embodiment of everything that was good with the world? And people want me to head an order. They say, we should start a new Golden Dawn order and you'll be the chief adept, BT. And I'm like, fuck you!
Say, get thee behind me, Satan. Get thee behind me, Satan. They're tempting you with power and control and putting yourself
so I'm giving it all away in the podcast as much as I possibly can, and while I'm alive, just because that's all I have to offer. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying, here's a bunch of stuff. Take it, have these experiences. Like I listen to all the podcasts. I know this isn't out there. So now you have it.
Yeah. Well, you can read a longer version of that experience in the last chapter of The Model of Love.
The Model of Love is unpublished. What's the published one?
When this is the book, it's called The Will of Divine Love.
The Will of Divine Love by Kess Frey. The last chapter is all about the experience that wasn't psychedelically induced.
Right. It wasn't.
It wasn't. Did it happen after you took psychedelics?
But it was... Oh, yeah, I had taken them prior to this, but...
By coincidence.
I wasn't under the influence of that.
Right.
At the time of the experience.
Have you seen the temple? Do you want to take a look?
I was in there when you and
we did some
Jamie
magic.
did a little magic.
Oh, cool.
My sister and I were in there.
Yeah.
With you guys.
Oh, I remember now. Yeah.
It was interesting.
It's about the same.
Well, I would like to check it out before I leave. Let's see if you've got the
I did a traditional Golden Dawn Requiem for a guy. Okay, so there's this guy named Freddie Neff. And he looks just like David Bowie. And he also, like David Bowie, struggled with heroin use. And he was also a musician. And he also liked Golden Dawn. He had a lot of things in common with David Bowie. And he introduced his friend back in the 80s to this thing called Golden Dawn magic. And that friend, after being really kind of interested in it, eventually joined the order. I met him. And then he lived here in that room for a while, and then anyway, more recently, that was all in 1995. 80s.
You've been living in this house for about 20 years, huh?
Yeah. Well, his friend passed away, the one that got him interested in Golden Dawn to begin with. So he asked me to perform a traditional, Golden Dawn Interorder Requiem in a Masonic hall in Holy Cross Cemetery for a man I've never met, and I was really honored to do it. I brought all the furniture and I did it absolutely sincerely. People who know me know that as much as I talk shit when it comes to actually performing the ritual work. And that's, people get confused, and that's where they think I have a split personality.
You're in recovery.
I'm totally sincere about it, but at the same time, I'm the most vocally against it.
Yeah. You're in recovery. We need to bear that in mind from having been in something that you found to be not good for you.
Yeah.
And you've gone out of it, but yet there was a true self aspect to it as well as a false.
I gained something from it. I can I can help to talk about at least some of the pitfalls, and also some of the things that are good about.
Yeah, people need both of those.
Yeah.
To keep the right balance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was my idea about this new esotericism, is a practice that balances, counterbalances all the other practices.
It makes me think of when, speaking of Alan Watts, he was talking about in the West we tend to, he used the metaphor of the thermostat, like if you put it at like no less than 73, but no more than 74, then it's like always turning on and off. Like, and the heat comes on and then turns off, and then the air conditioner comes on and then turns off, and the heat comes on and then turns. And we tend to do that in the West, so that we like are just kind of walking our little line, and we're not getting into trouble and all that. And that's kind of how we've been indoctrinated to be civilized, you know. And you know, and then like you know, you blow open those tantric channels in the forest. You were talking about giving consent. And I was thinking that maybe the first thing you should do is be like, I refuse! I refuse! I mean, that'd really make it absurd and fun, and it brings out the absurdity. Like, I refuse to let my true self work within me. I refuse! You know, and then eventually you realize how totally fucking absurd that is, and then you say, okay, I'm ready. I consent. And then you see what that feels like, and then you get a flow reversal, and then you've blown open all the channels, and then you're not resisting refusing. You know, you're consenting by choice because you prefer to consent rather than
it has to be a free choice. There is something called the 4 consents that I just remembered that I ought to tell you about. These are like 4 consents that the Spirit asks of us in our life. And the first one is in the earliest part of life, and that is we are asked to consent to our basic goodness. And of course, a lot of times people have trouble doing that because of wounding and so forth. The second one comes around puberty and through adolescence and into early adulthood. We're asked to consent to our creative energies, to our sexual energy, and all the creative energies and gifts that we have.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to cut off my balls at that point. I wasn't consenting anymore. Seriously, when I started hitting puberty, I was like, fuck this. Seriously. I have to go through life as a man. You know, like I didn't want to be a woman either. I just didn't want gender. I didn't want duality. I much preferred the way it was before when I didn't have those forces going on, and it was all a joke. And we used to joke about sex when I was 7 and 8 and 9.
So leaving childhood, that's a passage.
That's a
passage that's difficult for all of us.
Yeah, I never got over that.
Sadly, in our Western society, we don't have any really good ritual ways of facilitating that transition. As many.
I mean, some people get bar mitzvahs.
Aboriginal societies, and there are some traditional.
Well, they're post-Aboriginal, but yeah.
Like that, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
So anyway, the second consent is consenting to our sexual energy, our creative energies, and our gifts, our talents, our abilities. The third consent is to consent to our limitations as human beings, to accept and consent, especially as we continue growing older. Then the final consent is to consent to our death.
Oh, consenting to limitations. I like that a lot. Because that's exactly what we would run into at the temple, because we get a lot of fringe, you know. But we basically get people who wanted to shoot fireballs out of their fingers, and they weren't into their limitations. They wanted the break the laws of physics. They wanted to fly. They want, you know, to teleport. And
they wanted superpowers.
Yeah.
Like an 8-year-old.
Yeah. And when you couldn't show them that you had superpowers, or that you could do a spell and that someone would, you know, make a different decision, you know.
Power and control.
Yeah.
That's a big hook.
Yeah. I still get people, I want to say every day, but maybe every 3 or 4 days I'll get someone saying, "Can you help me? I have a problem with my, you know, relationship." I'm like, no.
Well, if we want to grow in love, truth, and freedom, we have to give that love, truth, and freedom to others.
I mean, if somebody's asking advice, that's one thing, but people want me to, like, do a tarot reading for their relationship issue. I'm like, no, I don't do that. I'm not that kind of magician.
Yeah. Well, I'll just give you a real short version of that experience, if you
Oh,
want.
yeah. Go for it.
So this came totally unexpectedly, and I was sitting on this chair, meditating, and I was reflecting on the Bodhisattva ideal of Vajrayana Buddhism, which I was really into, at that time in my life. And all of a sudden, I felt this spinning energy in the third eye chakra, and it kind of increased, and it was sort of like this dimensional thing opened up, and I felt myself drawn out of my physical body. I had a blindfold over my eyes, and there was the presence of this old soul, this higher being that I've had a relationship with, kind of carrying me through this expanse of inner space with a blindfold on, and it seemed like we went an immense distance. And at the same time, I was partially conscious of myself still sitting physically, in the chair in this apartment in San Francisco. And we finally came to what seemed like a top of a tall mountain. Then we stopped, and then the blindfold was removed. And the old soul, we were like at the peak of this mountain, and it was darkness all around. We were at the top of this peak. The old soul, he went over and he did a full body prostration in front of something. And all of a sudden, it was like this lightning bolt of energy shot into his head, and his whole body was glowing and was radiating out through his body with this great intensity. And then it stopped, and he got up, and then he gestured me to lie down in the same place where he was. So he was sort of showing me what I needed to do and what was going to happen. So on the inner plane, I prostrated myself, and all of a sudden this bolt of really powerful energy, I felt something like touching the top of my head. This bolt of energy came into the top of my head, and it filled me, and I was feeling this incredible feeling of love and purity, and it was just gradually radiating through my whole body. And at the same time, I was conscious of myself physically sitting in meditation, and it was like this energy was so overwhelmingly pure and powerful. It was like it was too pure for me. I couldn't tolerate it. It was too much.
Yeah.
But it was like this divine, sacred energy, and like I can just say, it was love. It was an energy of love. It was really powerful, and I felt like it was kind of just overwhelming. But if it stayed inside of me too long, it would just rip me apart, because I wasn't pure enough to be able to assimilate and hold it in my energy centers.
Yeah.
So it was an overwhelming experience, and then that experience stopped, and I went out of myself through the top of my head, and it was like I was inside this dark, very silent, peaceful bubble, and it was like I was sharing in this higher consciousness, which I could only call God's consciousness. And intuitively, through that sharing, I became aware that God was present inside of every soul on earth and everywhere. That God loves everyone unconditionally, and that the desire of this divine presence was that everyone would become conscious of the fact that this divine presence is within them. Because if they did, they would be freed from their confusion and their suffering, and they would realize that we're all one in this love, but that the wish of this higher being, this higher power, this higher presence, was that I should do whatever I can to awaken that in myself and to help other people awaken it in them. And that was all nonverbal, but that was the message that I got, very quickly through this altered state of consciousness. And then I came back kind of into myself, and I got up, from where I was prostrated. it was sort of like I had received a whole new awakening of my being and consciousness, and was being given my marching orders in a way.
Yeah.
And so then the blindfold was put back on me, and this spiritual guide started kind of flying me back, towards the material plane. And while we were going along, I was thinking, well, why is this blindfold on me? And I became curious. And I thought, well, I'm just going to take a peek. And so I kind of just lifted up a corner of the blindfold. And as soon as I did, I beheld underneath me this kind of like black ring, and inside of it was this eye, which I had encountered before in an actual psychedelic experience. And the eye was looking at me with this piercing gaze, and it was starting to draw me in, and it struck total terror into me. It was like the complete opposite of what I had experienced on the higher plane. And I felt like I was looking into hell. And there was just a lot of horrible stuff going on there.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, quickly, I just pulled the blindfold back down because I was scared shitless from this thing. And it was like, just totally overpowering. And so the way I've interpreted it now was that I went like to the mercy sphere, and I had that experience. And when I pulled the blindfold up, I was going over the severity sphere, and I wasn't, ready to face that. So I had to pull the blindfold down. But this spiritual guide has already been through that and can, kind of has command over those realms and could take me to where I went. And then I was brought back to where I was in my physical body, and I was just really blown away. That experience completely changed my whole approach to life.
Wow.
So it was very powerful. And it was like a beginning, an initiation. And, to initiate means to begin something. So it was an initiation in the sense that I was shown something, and my job is to work on myself and work, in the service of this, so I get to the point where I can have access to that.
What a trip.
On my own.
Now the I in Golden Dawn paradigm would tie in, in Hebrew with the I, with ayin, with the letter ayin, which in Hebrew ties in with the devil card.
Yeah, the devil card.
Yeah, and Capricorn, which also ties in with the quote-unquote the gross regenerative powers of nature, speaking in Victorian, so gross would mean only the total, and Baphomet and all of that stuff. So, but we're talking about basically Malkut, but we're talking kind of specifically, I would say, about something that's very relevant to us as humans, which is, rational consciousness operating within a bestial form. Us. And, that's our whole back and forth, and the reason why we make rules and pretend they're laws and punish each other for breaking them and all that is because we're animals trying real hard to accommodate the fact that we're rational beings, that we have intelligence, that we can remember things, and we know we're going to die, and that's what that I would represent in that context, is that separation from God, the separation from Tiferet, that happens between reason and being the heart of the soul of creation.
The separate self sense as
creation. The
separate self as a human being.
Yeah.
And the message of this experience is that in spite of what we think we are, we all have that higher divine principle in us.
Yeah.
And it's alive, it relates to us, and it wants us to know that that's what we really are.
Yeah.
It longs for us to know that, because it's so one with us that it's experiencing everything we're going through with us in a hidden way.
The last time I took what Terence McKenna calls a heroic dose of mushrooms, I saw a lot of eyes, and when I could roll my eyes back, I would get away from the, I'd get up to a place where it all became one. They all came together, and I've seen enough. There's a lot of artists who are depicting these things in their art, and it's like, oh yeah, he gets it. Oh yeah, I've been there. There's certain like ones where it's like they're obviously very well depicted. And based on a universal experience, apparently everybody has that experience when they get to that certain point in the trip, and but the light where it all comes together into sort of a pyramidal shape is up at the top, and then you look around you and you see all the different eyes, and you don't know if they're mad at you or what, and some of them are brown and some of them are blue, and they're blinking, and they're all, and it's like, okay, am I looking at ghosts? Are these the wings of the Archangel Azrael, the Archangel of Death? Is the veil of Paroquet that divides the illusion of the material world from the truth of the all omnipresence of God actually just the wing of Azrael? Or is it my ancestors looking at me from inside my own brain by way of my DNA? And so I've got this sort of rational monkey mind, like trying to figure out what the fuck the eyes are, but I certainly know what you mean when you talk about the eyes. And the idea that there's one big one that you move back down to when you're coming back down from the higher realms is really kind of terrifying.
It was like a magnetic pull.
Makes sense, though.
It would suck you into this hell realm if you kept looking at it.
There's the Jesus stuff about the blind man. The blind man is born without sin.
Oh, yes.
And that he who is blind is without sin because the eye causes you to sin. And Hannibal Lecter elaborated on that point, something about coveting.
Yeah, and innocence. So my mission with centering prayer is in the service of that.
Yeah, of the eye?
Not of the eye, but
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. It's in the... Well, you have to get past the eye to get to your true self.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I was resolved to was I need to really straighten out my karma. Because whatever your karma is...
Yeah, I'm all about that.
That's what will pull you into that.
That's the first thing you said that made sense.
If you've got negative...
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
If you've got negative karma, then that thing that's what will draw you into that.
Totally.
That hellish state.
Yeah.
And so in this dimension of time, we can work it out bit by bit and not have it all come down on us.
My mom used to say, you get what you believe, you get what you wish for, and if you have enough bad karma piled on top of you, you start wishing to cease to exist. And you do get what you asked for. So I mean, when we're talking about, I was kind of poo-pooing that the whole thing is based on this assumption from the Egyptians that everybody wants to avoid ceasing to exist and wants to be immortal. Well, I mean, obviously I want to avoid ceasing to exist and try to be immortal if it's possible. I'm just resigned to the fact that maybe it's not, or maybe we all already are immortal and we just don't know it, or that it's an eternal thing. But I think that relaxing and mellowing the fuck out is really the way to go for me physically, and that if I stress out about trying to be immortal and I need to go run around feeding homeless people to do it, then I'm going to kill myself, and I've done it all wrong, Yeah. And not that there's anything wrong with feeding homeless people. It's just that maybe in my case at the moment I needed to chill out and reflect on.
It's the spirit in which you act when you're doing it.
Yeah.
What's motivating? Is it mixed motivation, or is it more true and altruistic motivation?
Yeah.
And not doing it because it's a compulsion, but because the goodness in your heart inspires you to share and give what you can to others who are open to receiving it.
I still do it automatically, though. I mean, I'm sort of it's like, I don't know if I'd say I'm programmed, because I wasn't born into it. I chose it. I at a certain point I decided to identify myself as an Orthodox Christian. As a person who,
that really surprised me.
During the nativity time, during the nativity fast, if somebody asks me for my jacket, I have to give it to them because you just can't not. And if somebody offers me a cookie, I won't accept it because it's but you're still allowed to eat lobster. I mean, I went through that phase where I identified with that, and I kind of approached it like a discipline. I mean, when I was a kid, I learned karate, so I would always compare it to that, like a discipline like karate. Something that you choose to do, to walk the steps of, to show up on time and wave the incense and say the stuff. And I was singing in the choir for 4 years, and I did my time. I feel because they say, there's all these prayers where they say, may you remember the ones who sang in the choir like the cherubim of the angels. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. And so I feel like I did every Sunday for 4 years, and so, I've got that working for me. When I get to St. Peter and he looks at the list of the stuff I did, they'll be like, you lied to that poor girl, you made her cry. I'll be like, I know, it was fucked. And he'll be like, oh, but you sang in that Russian Orthodox choir for 4 years. Okay, come on in, you old rascal. And that's how that'll go.
I was quite surprised last year when you told me that you'd been involved in organized Christianity.
Yeah. It is just the most perverse thing I can do as my father's son.
Yeah, well, that's a good way of rebelling against your dad.
Yeah,
sure.
No, I mean, I did it as a joke, but he was laughing in my mind the whole time about it. It was like, I was kind of doing it not as an act of rebellion. It was kind of partly, my grandma, who was Christian, was still alive. So, and I was trying to convince her that the order was something she shouldn't hate or, think was evil. So I had told her that Martin Luther started the Rosicrucians and just didn't tell anyone, and I was horrible, I was a liar and a thief, Well, I wasn't a thief. I stopped stealing things when I was in Portal. So I was a thief through the outer order still. Yeah, and Hermes was a thief before he became the messenger of the gods. But anyway.
Yeah, so anyway, we've covered
quite a lot of ground here.
And you can go through and edit this.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the footage I have of you and my dad is raw. I don't know if I might just leave this raw. Because, I mean, we went through a whole journey. Like, in the first half, I was like, God, I'm just being a grouch. I don't feel good. I'm just, like, being reactive, But then, like, in the second half, we, like, went into some other places and kind of re-examined the first half. And so, I think it'd be interesting for people to come along for the journey, and even for now, for us deciding to leave it raw.
If they have the patience to listen to it.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm just too lazy to sit down and go through it, but I'm going to try to adjust the sound levels at least. Yeah. I don't think we mentioned any names we need to bleep out, did we? Any specifics? No, I said Voldemort at one point, but okay. Yeah, I mean, we don't bleep out Voldemort. We're not on Harry Potter rules here. But we use that as a bleep. But anyway, so we covered just about everything. All right.
Well, let me take a look in your magic room there.
Yeah, and thank you very much for joining us on the Esoterinerd podcast.
Well, my pleasure, and I hope that the listeners will find something worthwhile in this.
I hope so.
Something to think about, or maybe news you can use. Who knows?
Okay. Have a good night. Thank you, Kess, for being our guest on the Esoterinerd tonight. I can't thank you enough, really, for recording that 90-minute interview with my dad back in 1990. Hey, 1990, 90 minutes? Maybe there's something to this. Thank you to Lon Milo DuQuette for writing that poem. It occurs to me, in retrospect and listening to it, that I think that he was getting more at the fact that he had a lady there to help him. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but my takeaway was, yeah, I think you're right. Thelema was entirely made up by Rose Kelly Crowley, whose name I didn't know until just now. Thank you, Rose Kelly Crowley, for being the author of the Book of the Law, which I still haven't read. Thank you to the monks on Mount Koyasan for the music. And as always, thank you to you, the Esoterinerd, listening to this podcast. Until next time.